Chapter 1972. There was no chance to bring out the large war machines that Garush had prepared in the underground fortress. For example, the Iron Battle Scorpion. Similarly, in this life, Duke Mu did not give Brainless Roar enough time to corrupt the entire splendid valley, so there was no Fallen Guardian group of bosses in history. In addition, Duke drove the horde to Pandaria, so Brainless Roar had no time to do any side quests, so there was no Bloodthirsty Sock, the primitive dinosaur boss that was brought back from the giant beast island. Apart from a few diehard followers around Garush, he still made some achievements like in history. For example, the Dragon Maw clan that had revived the horde. In this life, the Dragon Maw clan declined with the death of the patriarch Zuluhid in the World War II. It was not until the Cataclysm that the Dragon Maw clan returned to the stage of history after Garush destroyed the Twilight Fortress in the Barren Lands. Overseer Zyra and Garush formed a very close relationship during the Twilight Highlands incident, and she and her Dragon Maw orc promised loyalty to Garush's cause. The terrifying ancestor dragon Garush was a direct descendant of the dragon race's Cataclysm ancestor. Zyra rode on its back and appeared in front of the Alliance's powerhouses as a boss. Oh. The group of Alliance powerhouses sighed. It had nothing to do with them again. Duque did not care about what kind of deal they made in order to get into the battle. In any case, what Duque wanted was an absolute crushing and destruction. Basically, every time a powerhouse jumped out from the Horde's side, there would be a corresponding powerhouse on the Alliance's side who would rush up and drag them to the side to fight. As soon as Garush appeared, a countess on a platform on Naxxramas jumped off a building. Everyone in the Alliance knew what Countess Katrana was. Now the Countess jumped off a building. Under the acceleration of gravity, the Countess's falling speed increased. The strong wind blew her black hair wildly, and her red dress looked like a falling comet from a distance. The Countess did not stretch her neck and let out a long roar. In the blink of an eye, the clothes on the Countess' back turned into a pair of black wings. Her slender and fair limbs turned into dragon claws covered in fine and solid black scales. Her seductive body was rapidly expanding. It only took about 3 seconds for her to transform from a human to a dragon. When she landed on top of Garaka's head, Onyxia had completely transformed into her dragon aspect form. Garaka's, who lacked the experience of fighting a dragon aspect, was caught off guard. Just as it raised its huge head, it realized that its wings had been hit by the opponent's signature, Deep Breath. After being reinforced and strengthened by the fire elemental realm, the progenitor dragon's entire wing was carbonized when it exploded into a sky full of sparks. The progenitor dragon let out a pained roar. Even after tumbling for more than 300 meters, it still could not stabilize its body. In the end, it was still a primitive creature, unlike the 5-color dragon race. The chromatic dragons were strengthened by the titans, and the truly powerful wyverns could even control the elements to soar in the sky. No one would have thought that the wyvern boss of the horde would be at an absolute disadvantage right from the start. As Garakas tumbled to the ground, Onyxia used her incomparably proficient flying skills to hover and use her 4 sharp claws to remove parts from Garaka's body. When the progenitor dragon crashed to the ground, creating a huge crater on the red ground, Onyxia also added 2 more legs. She directly used her considerable weight and the kinetic energy brought by the acceleration of gravity to press down on the opponent's lower back in one breath. Crack! It was the crisp sound of vertebrae breaking. Without giving the opponent any room to fight back, the black dragon's mouth, which had countless sharp teeth, had already bitten Garaka's neck. At the same time, Overseer Zyra was split in half by the black dragon's claws. The people of the Alliance could barely see a black shadow flash down. When they could see it clearly, the scene that decided the outcome of the battle had already appeared on the screen. They only saw the Black Dragon Princess, wearing a huge Alliance cloak, defeating the opponent as a mount of the Alliance. Regardless of whether it was the siege craftsman Haisu or the Karakasi heroes of the Mantis Demon, they were all hammered and killed one by one in front of this group of powerful people from the Alliance. This was not a battle of the same level. On the other side, Duque was still playing with brain-dead Roar. In the distance, more crown guards, who had escaped from the volcanic eruption, madly rushed over, but they were killed by the Alliance elites led by the Silver Hand. In the center of the battlefield, there were not many horde warriors still fighting. After another fierce clash, Theon used Ashbringer to suppress Nazgûl. Looking at the horde general who was already riddled with scars, he finally could not bear to see him die. He suddenly whispered, "Surrender. You are not one of those madmen who disregard everything and the lives of the people for the sake of power. You are different from them. If you surrender, I swear in the name of the Holy Light that the Alliance will give you fair treatment." Nazgûl, of course, knew that he could not defeat Theon, but his answer was incomparably loud and clear. "I am Nazgûl, the fist of the chieftain, the horde's commander. If today is the day I die, then I will die gloriously on the battlefield, for the horde. Is it worth it?" Theon was a little anxious. "Worth it? There is no such thing as not worth it. I am very happy that I am fighting a glorious battle with you. In the end, I stand on the side of the chieftain because this is my mission. If the person who defeats me in the end is you, I will also be very happy. Gurus will lead the orcs to destruction. Are you willing to do that? If the orcs are really going to go extinct, it is the will of the heavens. Otherwise, there will always be a hero who will lead the orcs and our world to prosperity." With that, another fierce clash ensued. This time, Tyrion had miscalculated. In his imagination, it would be another clash of swords and axes. But at the last moment, he did not know if Nazgûl's legs gave way, or if Theon still thought that Nazgûl was at his peak. Under the fierce attack of Ashbringer, it directly hit a large gap in Nazgûl's weapon. This directly broke his weapon. This, after Ashbringer, which was like a door plank, slashed out, it did not stop at will. Ashbringer, which represented the extreme path of toughness, faithfully carried out the power that its master had given it. With a flash of golden light, a huge wound appeared from the right side of Nazgûl's neck to the left side of his abdomen. There was no pain, no regret. On the rough green face that was unique to the orcs, Nazgûl smiled. Although I have lost, it is still honorable. Luck Tar, oh Gar, Theon suddenly felt a pain in his heart. He had defeated countless enemies, but he had never thought that he would feel like his heart was being cut by a knife after being defeated. Chapter 1973. At the side, Duque, who saw this scene, secretly sighed. A true hero did not differentiate between strong and weak, noble or lowly, race or age, in the face of a powerful enemy that could not be defeated. Perhaps 99% of people would choose to be a coward for life, but there would always be 1 in 10,000 people who would choose to stand up. Such people were often called heroes by the world. In Duque's memory, in the original history, Nazgûl appeared as a small soldier in the Wrath of the Lich King. Then, during the Cataclysm, he became an army soldier, equivalent to the Alliance's knight captain. Finally, during the Mystery of Pandaria, he became the general of the Expeditionary Army. He could be said to be the leader of the Expeditionary Army. Some of the players who played with Duque before he transmigrated were also part of the Horde. Especially in Pandaria, there were all kinds of missions, all kinds of encounters, all kinds of ships, all kinds of sinking. But General Nazgûl was a true hero. This warrior caused all kinds of trouble and asked various heroes to clean up the mess, but at the critical moment, he showed the courage, ability and wisdom that a warrior should have. It was no exaggeration to say that Nazgûl's entire experience formed an inspirational story of an ordinary orc soldier who grew up step by step to become an independent horde general. In fact, Duque knew that General Nazgûl was the same as Wajin. There was no difference in their understanding of the horde. It was just that the path they chose was different. The reason why he said this was because he had a reference by his side, Markarok. Markarok was a traditional orc who was brainwashed by Braindead Roar. They believed that other than Kukkuran, any other race, including orcs from other clans, were untouchables. On the other hand, General Nazgûl treated every comrade who fought with him as a companion and a great warrior who grew up with him. Looking at Nazgûl, who was still acting like a human, and the Beastman army that had almost gone crazy, it wasn't easy for him to maintain his rationality under such circumstances, and he still refused to use Yashaji's power. In the past, Duque found it hard to understand why Nazgûl still chose to continue to follow the crazy Gurus even though he was very clear-headed. Later, he found out that it was because Gurus recognized him. For all the orcs who were loyal, it was impossible for them to betray their benefactor. Nazgûl reminded Duque of Grom. In order to repay Duque's kindness, Grom didn't hesitate to give up his identity as the tribe's hero and become Duque's personal spirit after death. Even when the Alliance and the Horde were at war and the Alliance was about to attack his son, Grom chose to remain silent. Duque knew that if he gave the order, Grom would definitely attack Garush with his axe. Duque didn't do this because it was too cruel for a warrior who was truly worthy of respect. It is the father's fault for not teaching his son properly. But how could a father who had been cut off from his path of return and had no choice but to wander in another world for more than 10 years fulfill his duty of teaching? It was precisely because he knew about Nazgûl's deeds that if there was an uprising, Nazgûl would entrust all his hopes for the future of the Horde to the people he trusted. For a general who had already reached this level, Duque could only evaluate him as someone who was absolutely worthy of respect. Sometimes, he felt sad for the Horde. It wasn't that the Horde didn't work hard, but the Alliance had him, Duque, as their boss. In comparison, he couldn't have too high of expectations for Sar. He couldn't blame Nazgûl either. After all, Nazgûl was only a rising star of the Horde. It was already very impressive that he could do this. Seeing that Nazgûl had fallen, Duke floated over from afar and spoke into the ears of Theon and the people around him. The Alliance will bury Nazgûl. This decision made Tyrion and the other righteous people feel a sense of comfort. But Brainless Roar was unhappy. He scolded, even after death, the warriors of the Horde will only return to the land of our ancestors. You Alliance pigs have no right to profane the remains of the warriors of the Horde. Ugh! His words stunned the big shots of the Alliance for a moment. Then, they burst into laughter. F***CKU. What did you just throw out? Asterisk whoosh whoosh whoosh. Asterisk an axe made of shadow energy tore through the air. It was obviously aimed at Duque. It was a weapon of blasphemy. The weapon of blasphemy, which was refined and shaped by Yashaji's power, missed and exploded where Duque was 1/10 of a second ago. The violent explosion created a small, shadowy energy storm that affected everything within a 30-yard radius. Duque nimbly used Flash to appear in another place. He smiled lightly. Blasphemy? Sorry. No one blasphemes their ancestors more than you, Brainless Roar. Oh Garush, your father is grieving, your ancestors are weeping. Don't mention my ballless father. Brainless Roar attacked again. He stretched out his left hand and grasped in the air. A dark attack filled with negative emotions was unleashed. Despair's grasp. This was a double special skill that contained mental shock and shadow energy. If an ordinary hero was hit by this, even if they did not die from the violent shadow energy, their minds would be destroyed by the endless negative emotions. In the ancient war between the Titans and the ancient gods, hundreds of guardians of the same level as Alexstrasza had their minds destroyed just like that. They became walking corpses. Duque was not interested in this kind of self-torture. He used Flash again. This time, Duque appeared 30 meters behind Brainless Roar. For the powerful pharaoh, if he did not stop their almost endless teleportation, there would be no need to fight this battle. Ordinary mages had a cooldown time for Flash, and the more they used it, the easier it was for them to make mistakes. After all, Flash was a type of teleportation. The more powerful Pharaoh was, the more he had no such restrictions. This was especially true on the battlefield. If Pharaoh could set up more subtle spatial coordinates, a warrior who relied purely on physical combat would not have the slightest chance of winning. They would definitely be controlled to death. However, the moment Brainless Roar officially absorbed the power of Yashaji's heart, he was no longer a pure warrior. His physical combat skills were still superb. What was even stronger was the power that came from Yashaji. He raised his hand, and a mass of dark energy that completely affected the city burst out from his hands. That was the corrosive vortex, obtained from Yashaji's blood. It looked like the warrior's whirlwind slash. However, every blade of light from the giant axe carried a strong dark aura. Any blade of light could easily cut open the ground, and the surrounding space was dyed in a strange blue and white color. Duque was unmoved. Sigh. Still not willing to reveal your true face? Chapter 1974. If Duke wanted to, an ordinary brainless roar could really be dealt with a snap of his fingers, and with a pa sound, it would be reduced to ashes without leaving any residue. Regular warriors had no chance of winning against a demigod like Pharaoh, who could turn into elementals. It was like using an axe to chop at the air. It was meaningless. Elementals, on the other hand, could easily crush a warrior. Garush was different. Before, he had no value at all for Duque to make a move. But now, the system had changed his description to Garush, the incarnation of Ashoka. True face? Ha ha ha. Duke Marcus, are you so eager to see me slaughter you humans, kill all those damned dwarves, and throw all the elves into the wolves' lair? Oh. And those Drenii who are worse than pigs, ha 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 ha. You will have a chance. I will chop off your head and imprison your soul in a pathetic skull. I will watch you and your alliance turn into ashes. Brainless Roar was really brainless. This scene was directly displayed in front of the millions of people in the alliance. Who knew how many people cursed on the spot, and even more people clenched their fists tightly. Oh. The people in your tribe are almost all dead, Duque mocked. In the distance, the mutated Kyukuran guards were still charging over without a care for their own safety. But just the Silver Hand and the Night Elf Sentinels were enough to make them suffer. Not to mention the Kirin Tor mages, who were all Radiant Moon mages. Only the weak will die on the battlefield. I am the son of destiny. Only the powerful beast men who survive are qualified to stand behind me, Garush roared and transformed. Garush suddenly opened his arms and arched his body. His neck seemed to be broken, and the back of his head touched his back. His swollen muscles finally began to burst, and countless purple-blue veins began to spread out from his shoulders, chest, and thighs. The scene of them wriggling on the surface of his body, as if there were thousands of earthworms rolling under his skin, was simply explosive, enough to make any trypophobia suffer collapse. Garush's entire body was like a gigantic inflatable doll, and his body rapidly expanded. 1 person tall, 2 people tall, 5 people tall, 10 people tall. In just 10 seconds, the originally 2.5 meters tall burly man had turned into a giant-like monster. The 2 decorative beast fangs on Garush's shoulders had been swallowed by his muscles, and countless spikes grew out of his bones and pierced through his flesh. Blood splattered out, and as soon as it sprayed into the air, clouds of ominous blue and white fog immediately spread out. The pain stimulated Garush's ferocity, causing him to let out a series of barbaric roars that were neither human nor beast. At this moment, if the audience had not seen Garush's true appearance just a moment ago, no one would have recognized this terrifying monster as the great chief of the tribe. Monster. The Alliance audience had a unanimous opinion. Mom. Are all tribes so scary? An 8-year-old girl hugged her mother's thigh in horror. Yeah. That's how the big bad guy of the tribe killed your grandfather and grandmother back then. The cruel scene of the battle at the Door of Darkness 30 years ago once again appeared in the middle-aged woman's mind. At that time, she was still a child, and she had witnessed the most brutal massacre in the world. On the other side, a large amount of audience feedback came from Duque's magic net. He could not help but sigh inwardly at Braindead Roar's pig-like opponent. Not only did he have an enigmatic self-confidence and arrogance, but he also had the awareness of entering the ultimate villain boss, but he did not have the strength to respond. The positive image of the tribe that Sal had painstakingly created over the years had been easily destroyed by Braindead Roar. This was completely in line with the Alliance's propaganda needs. In front of the gigantic Garush, Duque looked too small. It felt as if Garush wanted to kill Duque as easily as an elephant crushing an ant. The audience watching this scene through the live broadcast was also worried. Dad, will Commander Marcus die? In Gold Flash City, a little boy tugged at his father's sleeve. The father's left arm was empty, and his long sleeve fluttered in the wind, just in time to be tugged at by his own child. His back was perfectly straight, which was the unique posture of a soldier. On his face, which had a long scar that extended from the left side of his face to the left corner of his mouth, a hearty smile that did not match his resolute face appeared. He used his remaining right hand to touch his son's head. "Silly child, don't worry. Lord Marcus is not only the greatest commander of our alliance, but he is also the most powerful human in the world. This has to start from when he, as the weakest mortal, killed the commander of the Burning Legion, Sardras, who possessed the demigod wizard Medivh. At that time, he was only the lowest level official wizard. Duque's rise had long been eulogized by countless bards in the alliance. In the past 30 years, Duque had walked step by step from the grassroots to the pinnacle of the alliance's power. He had fought in great battles, and finally became a god as a mortal. This story had long been heard by the people of the alliance. But when it was told in this scene, it just happened to add a sense of history to Duque's battle. No problem. Lord Marcus is a man who has killed 2 ancient gods. Battle achievements were confidence. This sense of glory and pride filled the chests of every member of the alliance. No one interrupted the father's explanation, and the surrounding people nodded in agreement. Similar scenes were happening in the streets and alleys of various towns in the alliance, encouraging the new generation of young people to make a declaration of pursuing their dreams towards this great human hero that seemed so far away, yet so close at hand. "When I grow up, I want to become a great man like Lord Duke Marcus." The people were eager to see the scene of Duque crushing Garush, but unfortunately, the live signal began to deteriorate, and Sally Whitemane had to explain on the spot. The Horde's great chief Garush used a large amount of evil god power, which interfered with the magic transmission signal. "I'm sorry, the transmission may be interrupted at any time." There was no way around it. Even if Duque filled Azeroth with all kinds of black technology talents, there would still be a situation of unbalanced technological development. Not every world had Da Vinci or Edison. Some things, even if one knew the direction, still needed a huge amount of practice and that 1% inspiration to cross the chasm of failure and set foot on the other side of victory. In fact, even with modern camera equipment, it was destined that the next scene would not be seen. Chapter 1975. A massive amount of shadow-attributed diabolic energy filled the center of the battlefield. Huge energy tornadoes with a diameter of more than 20 meters were everywhere. Blue and white colors interfered with all the elements. The Alliance powerhouses at the scene had their vision distorted by the air and heat, not to mention ensuring the transmission of the live broadcast. Garush used the method of casting a wide net to fill the space within a radius of 300 meters with evil energy that was full of negative mental energy. He was using this method to repel all other forces that did not conform to him. In Duque's mind, countless terrifying scenes also appeared. Unfortunately, Duque was the only special existence in the entire Azeroth. Mental attacks and whatnot, if they could not break through the multiple layers of mental defenses set up by Duque, it would be worse than watching a horror movie. Small pop-up windows appeared in Duque's vision. Unless Duque really wanted to die and put his consciousness into watch, any emotions such as despair, pain, envy, hatred, and other emotions would not contaminate Duque's thoughts at all. At this time, Duque was like a so-called cloud player. He did not play the game himself, but watched the video of other streamers clearing the game. The terrifying and desperate spiritual energy emitted from Garush had already forced many of the Alliance's big shots to retreat. Other than the most strong-willed paladin who could still stand within 200 meters, the other leaders had no choice but to retreat to a safe place. It seemed that Duque was at a great disadvantage. Only those who really knew the ropes knew that Garush was not qualified to be compared to Duque at all. Did they really think that Duque had nothing to gain after traversing thousands of timelines? Stop joking. He had retracted all the branches of the timelines and destroyed all the terrible branches of history, as if wiping away the fog of fate that shrouded the future. Through the authority that the will of the planet Azeroth had given him, Duque finally saw the only answer. It was like the only flame of hope in the darkest night, or like a distant star shrouded in dark clouds, shining with the only light of order in a hazy and chaotic world. Yes. That was the path to becoming a true god. The path to godhood that even Alun could not tell him, and that only the will of the planet was qualified to reveal to him. The true authority of the four elemental realms, the end of the path of magic, and the authority to control the world. Why was it that after the titans of the pantheon left this planet, the guardians of the earth still had eternal life? As long as their will did not collapse, they could live forever. They had clearly left, so why were the titans able to give their servants an almost inexhaustible amount of power? Where did the time, life, magic, earth, dream, and other extraordinary divine spells of the 5 dragon aspects come from? There was only one answer to all the questions, because the right to use the laws of this planet was already in their hands. The one who made the laws was the true God. Below true gods, all existences with the second highest authority over a certain law were known as demigods in that domain. In ancient times 25,000 years ago, during the Great War between the Titans and the ancient gods, the will of planet Azeroth was awakened. The path to the gods' kingdom for mortals was sealed forever. On the ground, only the races that were recognized by both the planet's will and the Titans were allowed to retain the right to use the supreme authority. For example, the Guardians of Otter and the Pentashade Guardian Dragons. Especially the Pentashade Guardian Dragons, they were forcibly evolved from the primordial dragons of Azeroth using divine power. This was more like an agreement between the star souls and the Titans. Only they had the opportunity to open that door and become the saints of the mortal world, which was the demigod. Until the Great War at the Dark Portal, which triggered a change in the world order, a large number of mortal heroes came into being and started this vigorous era. The will of planet Azeroth had no choice but to open a gap in this door again. The relationship between the planet and the intelligent races living on it was a bit like the relationship between humans and parasites such as mites on the human body. This was symbiosis. Without special means, of course, humans could not notice the movements of mites. However, the rotten skin and even internal organs of the human body brought about equally dangerous consequences. Modern people would see a doctor, take medicine, apply ointment, or even perform surgery to expel the disease. And the so-called saints of the mortal world, the demigod, were the executors of these means. Now, the enemy was getting stronger and stronger. As long as the will of planet Azeroth still had the desire to live and did not want to be destroyed, it would have to make greater concessions. This time, the concession it made was the authority of power. Duque did not know how to smoothly grasp this authority. Perhaps there was no other existence in the world who knew how the god of the weave operated. Duke pulled out the Song of Light and Shadow, and carefully sensed the laws of nature flowing in his body that was becoming more and more condensed. No matter how strong the divine body was, no matter how much the elements were compressed, it could not absorb the entire world's elements into the body. This was a power that was completely different from the elemental power he had. No, more accurately, it was the way in which this power was formulated and used. It had already become one with the world, intertwining with each other. It was as if he could feel the mysterious arcane energy, the calm and cold water elements, and the violent and lively fire elements in this world with every movement. A second passed in the outside world, but after Duque released his spirit sense and perception, it felt like millions of minutes and seconds had passed. As long as Duque willed it, the molecular structure of every fire element, water element, and arcane energy could be magnified thousands of times in his eyes, like a giant picture. And with just a thought, he could completely change its structure. Even if it looked the same on the surface, it would become a completely different existence on the inside. This was the law. Although it was still very preliminary and imperfect, like a toddler learning to walk, this method of groping for stones to cross the river far surpassed the billions of living beings in the mortal world. Seeing that brainless howl had finally transformed into an ugly monster that all intelligent beings in the world with a normal brain would naturally hate, Duque knew that the name Gurus Hellscream, this existence, had completed his historical mission. The long period of indulging him and waiting for him to court death had finally come to a point where he could no longer tolerate it. Let's end this. Duque calmly raised the sword of holy light in his hand. Dark spiritual energy of despair. brilliant golden holy light. After shaping this scene into a battle between good and evil, everything fell into place. The warmth of holy light, the mysteriousness of arcane spells, the coldness of frost, and the blazing of flames, for completely different powers erupted from Duque's body at the same time without conflicting. This powerful touch that was a little confusing to the senses was so powerful that no expert of the Alliance could withstand it, and they had to retreat even further. At this moment, a ray of golden light suddenly pierced Gurus's chest from the front to the back. Chapter 1976. It was a bloody hole the size of a bowl, and one could see what was behind it, which was covered by his majestic body. It was a ghastly sight. Ordinary people would have died long ago. Treating Gurush, who was like an incarnation of an ancient god, as an ordinary person was the biggest mistake. A fatal wound in the eyes of mortals was like a mosquito bite to the berserk brain-dead roar. Ha ha ha. Is that all you've got? Duke Marcus. The brain-dead roar laughed wildly. It doesn't hurt. It doesn't itch. Oh. Is that so? The corners of Duque's mouth curled up into a smile. If the people of the Alliance saw this, they would lose fans. In the distance, Jaina felt a little unbearable. She sighed in her heart. Gurush was completely finished. She had been with Duque for many years before finally going from Duque's disciple to Duque's woman. No one knew Duque better than she did. It had been a long time since she had seen her man show such power. Was this also an aura? Yes. In the face of a powerful monster, perhaps a hero with extraordinary courage would not turn pale and their teeth chatter, but the faint sense of tension could still be felt. There would never be a second person in the Alliance who had the luxury and tranquility of Duque. Whether it was facing the green tide of orcs, the Burning Legion boss, or the ancient god, Duque's indifference, which seemed to be above all living things, could not be learned by anyone. Mages needed to be calm. If they were not calm, they would recite the wrong spell, or confuse the flow of magic in the magic circuit, or activate the runes. Duque was the only person in the world who could be as calm and collected as he was. There was no doubt that this was what attracted Jaina the most about Duque. Ah! Gurush's voice, which had become hoarse due to his anger, sounded as if it came from the deepest depths of hell. He glared at Duque with bloodshot eyes and gnashed his teeth as he roared, "Holy light! Damn the power of the holy light! You remind me of those frail Drenii. Very good, I will first wipe out the Alliance, then drag out every Drenii and pull out all of their flesh and bones to make them into leather drums. I will make them remember who our world belongs to even if they fall into hell." Tsk. Merid, who was far away, gritted his teeth. Your damned world is coming to an end. If not for Duque's repeated reminders not to interfere unless something happened to him, Hoof would have been the first to rush up and use her divine axe to give brainless Roar a taste of the wrath of a Drenii. Gurush raised his axe high at Duque. At this moment, Blood Roar couldn't just be called this name. Apart from the fact that it was a single-edged two-handed axe, there were no other traces of its original form. Clusters of blue high-purity shadow elemental crystals wrapped around the axe, enlarging it to match the size of the enlarged brainless Roar. The original, Blood Howl, was probably a decoration inside the gigantic axe. After the surrounding space was filled with a huge amount of Yasha-type dark power, Duque had to be very careful when he wanted to teleport. It wasn't that he couldn't, but the dark power that the opponent emitted was too strong, and it was very likely that it would disrupt the stability of the spatial coordinates at a critical moment. Without Duque's teleportation ability, this was more like a bombardment. Duque muttered in a low voice, "Look at my 100% bare-handed attack." A pair of frost elemental hands as thick as the smallest frigate appeared out of thin air, like a huge palm the size of a dance hall. The giant version of the Blood Howl was immediately clamped. Brainless Roar cried out in shock. He suddenly realized that standing in front of him was no longer the tiny Duque, but a giant elemental giant that was the same size as him. Arcane magic, frost, and fire. The perfect mixture of the three elements presented a mixed-colored giant. On the giant's head, Duque sat upright in the frost elemental head. Through the translucent outline of the elemental giant's head, one could see Duque with his legs crossed. Duque and Brainless Roar were essentially doing the same thing. The difference was, Duque controlled the elements and let the elements form a giant outside his body. Brainless Roar's control over the elements was even worse. He had no choice but to stuff all the dark power that carried the negative mental energy of Yasha type into his body. Ah! Impossible. Realizing that his strength could not overwhelm this pure elemental giant opposite him, Garush screamed. Pursuing the power of darkness was like using cheats. Using cheats could help you defeat enemies that you could not possibly defeat. No matter what professional player or national team you were, using cheats was the thrill of killing the enemy. It was at this time that Garush found that his cheats were a little ineffective. Duque's giant used 2 frost arms to clamp his axe, but under the giant's armpits, there were actually 4 flame arms of the same size. A pair of arcane palms held the gigantic arms of Brainless Roar, making it impossible for him to exert any strength. Another pair of flame palms slapped fiercely on the shoulders, suddenly clasping Brainless Roar's shoulder blades. The next second, the elemental giant retracted its legs, and its body appeared to be suspended in the air in an anti-gravity state. Garush's brain was not working well. He himself had become bigger, but he was still bound by the gravity of the planet. The problem was that the elemental giant itself could be supported by the wind without a high concentration of elements and condensed into a solid body. His slow thinking caused Garush to be kicked in the stomach by the elemental giant at the same time. Ignoring the elemental giant's body that was parallel to the ground, the elemental giant's movements were more like a snatch. In the blink of an eye, Garush's huge body was strangely dislocated. His arms were fiercely pulled by the elemental giant, and his body was like an old-fashioned cannonball, flying backward with a loud bang. In midair, Garush bent down with all his might and looked at Duque's elemental giant in horror. With his poor knowledge and poor eyesight, he really could not see how Duque had removed his arms. Only the strongest of the strong could see that when the elemental giant used its arcane arms to hold Brainless Roar's arms, Duque had already launched an attack. It was a golden holy light that shot out from under the arcane arms. Anyone with a little elemental sensitivity would be able to detect the powerful holy light. Unfortunately, there was only one word in Brainless Roar's fighting dictionary: reckless. Elemental sensitivity? That did not exist. Relying purely on his eyesight to distinguish the opponent's attack, he did not notice the elemental giant's little movements at all. So his reaction was, "You cheat dash, I didn't." Duque instinctively wanted to deny it, but when he remembered that he had relied on his knowledge of transmigration and the system to create the situation he had today, Duque changed his words. Cheats. Let's put it that way. You cheats, so do I. It's just that, my cheat is better. Chapter 1977. The scene was too chaotic. The highly concentrated elemental turbulence disrupted the surrounding field of vision, causing the airflow in the entire area to become extremely chaotic. Bystanders could only see a mass of colorful paste churning about, and only the experts with the strongest senses could sense it. In the blink of an eye, the collision of the elemental elements must have happened in many details that were unknown to outsiders. Kale, who was already an elemental demigod, was the most sensitive to elemental fluctuations. Next was Jaina, the mage sister. Sizzle, at the moment the lightning struck, Duque used Song of Light and Shadow to launch 2 rounds of holy light attacks. Boom! 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 Crack! Crack! Bzzz, the holy light and shadow energy collided. It sounded like a muffled sound, but in fact, it was 7 almost continuous sounds mixed into one loud sound. That's right. Duque launched 7 attacks on each side. 7 attacks made up a round, 1 on each side. One had to admit that Yashaji's strengthening of the Brainless Roar's body was very good. Perhaps the ancient gods had special skills to resist holy light, to adjust their body's resistance to it. Although Duque's first holy sword light cannon had pierced through the Brainless Roar's chest, Duque knew very well that the second one was only half effective. Duque had a lot of experience dealing with this kind of physique. Including the fleeting nature element, the continuous slashes of holy light, arcane, ice, fire, and nature elements made Gurusha's arms lose the opportunity to use the elements to wrestle with it. Bystanders couldn't detect it, but in fact, after the fifth round of attacks, Gurusha's giant arms had begun to tremble at a high frequency. At this moment, a sudden wave of shadow energy made Gurusha's arms completely unable to adapt to it. In the end, it was the gorgeous holy light that was like the rising sun. Yashaji, who could no longer maintain his dark power, lost all resistance under the continuous multi-elemental attacks. Faced with the blazing holy light that emitted a high temperature, Gurusha's thick shoulder was completely deformed by the holy light within a tenth of a second. The power of the holy light that was gathered to the extreme did not dissipate at all. Almost as soon as the holy light touched the flesh, the vertical surface of the holy light that came into contact with the holy light splashed out radially blue and white waves of flesh. Bang! The elemental giant, who was in the air parallel to the ground, gave a kick, causing even more elements to explode in their original positions, bursting forth with even greater shock waves, spreading outwards in circles. It was a ripple formed by a mixture of many elements. It mixed up the surrounding dust and gravel and rolled into an elemental storm, turning the surroundings into a mess. As for the giant version of brainless roar that was kicked away by the elemental feet, its condition was even worse. Even though his huge body had already flown into the air, the shockwave brought about by the huge air pressure was still like plowing the ground, causing the incomparably exaggerated cracks on the ground to extend backwards. Finally, after flying for more than 300 meters, he crashed into a section of Orgrimmar's city wall that had yet to completely collapse. More cracks appeared on the already crumbling wall, and 3 seconds later, it collapsed with a loud bang. This was not the end. Duque gave Queen Shi a small look. Queen Shi elegantly raised 2 fingers. Snap! A crisp snap of her fingers. A gust of strong wind swept across the red earth that was filled with turbid energy turbulence. Everywhere it passed, everything in its path was blown away. Most likely, it was blown into the riverbed of the River of Wrath. At the same time, a flame whip extended from the elemental giant's flaming arm, like a lasso. In one breath, it wrapped around the neck of the brainless roar who had fallen into the pile of rubble, and pulled him back. The elemental giant stepped on Brainless Roar's back, and Brainless Roar's huge face sank more than 2 meters into the ground. It was only when the turbulence dispersed that the surrounding people saw what had happened. The faces of the crown guards who had not died all showed a look of horror at the same time, and they screamed in unison, "No!" Those with insufficient perception had already missed many of them. The mortals could only see the Brainless Roar being stepped on and the bloody mist that filled the sky. Those with sharp eyes saw that the elemental giant had elegantly thrown away the 2 huge broken arms, and at the same time, the wounds on the arms and the body were spurting out blue and white blood filled with an evil aura. The live broadcast returned to normal, and every member of the alliance had their mouths agape. They had always heard about how powerful the experts of their own alliance's hero squad were, but only when they saw this scene for themselves did they realize how powerful their boss was. On the other side, the crown guards seemed to have seen the most unbelievable thing in their lives. Their expressions clearly showed that they did not believe that their great chief would be defeated. No one had expected that the battle would end just as the warm-up was over. No. No. I haven't lost yet. I haven't. Garush was still struggling violently below. Everyone could see that his ghastly wound, which could easily allow a tank to pass through, was actually healing. Countless earthworm-like muscles regenerated, and 2 new arms were forming. Unfortunately, these 2 arms now looked like the size of a normal orc, and it seemed that it would still take a while for them to grow to match their current huge size. It's over. Garush. Whether it's you or the tribe. Duque's proud voice instantly spread throughout the battlefield. Then, the elemental giant turned back into 2 arms, and it raised a single-edged 2-handed axe that looked very similar to Bloodhowl, except that the axe was made of the purest fire element. Crack. Crack. Crack, it was like chopping wood. The elemental giant's axe chopped down again and again on the neck of the gigantic Garush. It had to be said that the body that had been strengthened by the ancient god's dark energy was really tough. Unfortunately, under Duque's rapid elemental switching, even the toughest neck would be finished. A cracking sound came from the cervical vertebrae, and everyone could hear it. It was the sound of the cervical vertebrae shattering. But before the cervical vertebrae were cut off, the red earth that carried the gigantic Garush seemed to be unable to withstand the elemental giant's fierce attacks, and it began to sink with a rumble. Of course, Duque knew that it was actually the rising volcano that caused the surrounding horizon to sink. But it looked like the elemental giant's fierce attacks had instantly pulled down the land south of Agrima by dozens of centimeters. This scene caused countless mortals to cover their mouths in shock. What kind of great power was this? Uplifting mountains, severing rivers, falling stars, capsizing oceans. This kind of power that mortals could not imagine was too exaggerated. Was this the end of the mortal power, the lofty appearance of supreme divine power? Chapter 1978. The magic communication projection in the Alliance was not some mass-produced TV. The large illusory three-dimensional screen used for publicity required a magic transmission node to be set up in advance, and then at least one sky mage was sent to monitor the flow of magic. Therefore, at most, a large screen could be placed in every densely populated area. On the screen, the super-elemental giant controlled by Duque chopped down on brain-dead Roar's neck like a log. Originally, every square in the Alliance was always full of discussion and low exclamations, making the square seem noisy. But at this time, every square in the Alliance seemed to be under some kind of silent spell, and the squares of all sizes gradually quieted down. The silence was just an illusion before the storm. 1 chop, 2 chop, 3 chop, 7 chop. When the elemental giant's axe was finally like an executioner, ruthlessly chopping off Gurus's huge and ugly head. The crowd continued to be quiet for a few seconds. But in these few seconds, it felt like the emotions of all the Alliance people were like springs that had been pressed to the bottom. Pressed to the end, it was either collapse or the most thorough explosion. Sally Whitemane's excited voice just happened to ring out at this moment. Did you see it? The people of the Alliance. Every soldier who fought or stuck to their posts. Did you see it? Just now, the Supreme Commander of the Alliance, His Excellency Duke Marcus, finally used his elemental giant to chop off the head of the Horde's chief, Gurus Hellscream. The death of Gurus, who colluded with the ancient god Yashaji, symbolizes the destruction of the evil Horde. The Alliance has won. Long live the Alliance. The excitement that had been brewing for a long time was finally released at this moment. Boom! The next moment, the cheers of countless Alliance people burst out, resounding through the sky and resounding in every corner of the Alliance's territory. From the most prosperous Eastern Kingdom continent, to Snow Northrend, which had long been allocated, to Kalimdor, which had been in constant conflict for more than a decade, and finally to Pandaria, which had recently joined the Alliance. On every continent in Azeroth, the fanatical cheers of the Alliance people soared. Long live the Alliance! We won! The soldiers raised the weapons in their hands and their fists. The passionate girls kissed every Alliance soldier they saw. The older generation of the Alliance kept wiping away their tears in excitement. The cruel images of their homes being destroyed by the Horde flashed in their minds like a movie, and the voices and smiles of their loved ones who had lost their lives kept replaying in their minds. Long live! In front of Orgrimmar, the Alliance soldiers chanted all sorts of slogans, killing every single mutated beastman. It's over. Queen Sin, Muradin Bronzebeard, Jean, Tyrion, Gavin Rad, and the other elders who had participated in the second battle of the Dark Portal were still in disbelief. It's over. Duque said with absolute certainty. Below him, the giant Garush who had lost his head could no longer maintain his form. A large amount of rancid blue and white liquid flowed out of the corpse and was purified by the holy water that Duque had prepared beforehand. Nearly 10 flying transport ships were pouring holy water from the Naru to the scene. ZZZ. Without the support of evil energy, Garush's body shrank rapidly. In less than half a minute, he had become a headless and handless corpse. Sigh. The sigh of an old horde hero echoed in the weave. Duque didn't know how to face Grom. No matter how he dealt with this matter, it would only become awkward. Duque shook his head and told himself, I'm a human of the Alliance. With a light tap, the elemental giant who had just displayed his might was annihilated in the air, and all the elements returned to their respective elemental realms. Phew. Letting out a long breath, Duque looked at the brownish-red soul that was leaping in his palm. There was still a remnant of Garusha's soul that hadn't disappeared, and it kept roaring angrily. Unfortunately, his soul was imprisoned in that palm-sized place by Duque. Without hesitation, Duque put his palms together, and his powerful soul power crushed the last of Garusha's soul. Duque sighed. It's finally over. If he had killed Garush, there wouldn't have been the so-called King of Draenor. Duque really had enough of those damned enemies who didn't die cleanly and came back to cause trouble. The Pandaren leader, Zhu Tulan, stepped forward. Commander, actually, we Pandaren think that a fair trial would be better. Duque didn't back down. The Horde has brought tens of millions of casualties to the Alliance. This disaster is more serious than the damage caused by the Horde in Pandaria. The Alliance has tried to solve the problem in a peaceful way, gathering the power of all the intelligent races in Azeroth to face the Burning Legion and the Ancient Gods. I'm sorry, but the Horde has let down the Alliance's good intentions. So, this is the trial the Alliance has given the Horde. Kill the Great Chief. Destroy them all. Alright, I'll report this to Emperor Xiaohao. Emperor Xiaohao will understand the Alliance's actions, Duque said solemnly. A few days later, on the wasteland of Splendid Valley, erudite Zhou Zhua and a group of Alliance heroes witnessed the appearance of Xiaohao's soul. With the help of the four gods and Xiaohao, Splendid Valley regrown its first tree, symbolizing the end of the war in Pandaria and the beginning of the reconstruction of Splendid Valley. More importantly, the Alliance held a throne meeting while sending millions of soldiers to clear out the remaining orcs on the Kalimdor continent. Duque sat on the commander's throne, and a dozen or so Alliance leaders sat in a ring of thrones. Everyone's eyes fell on the few special representatives at the bottom of the throne. Duque cleared his throat. Let me emphasize. The Darkspear trolls only represent the Darkspear tribe. The High Elves and humans used to form an alliance, which is different from the Amani trolls and Dark Branch trolls. Just like how the Blood Elves and Night Elves are now different races. Is everyone clear now that I've put it this way? The leaders nodded. Alright, now, the Alliance will hold a public vote on whether or not to allow the Tauren, Darkspear trolls, and the Forsaken to join the Alliance. Leaders with voting rights, please raise your hand. Below, Ben, Wajin, and Dranos were all anxious. The Horde was done for, and the era of the Alliance's unification of Azeroth was inevitable. As the core race of the Horde, joining the Alliance was the only way out. In the past week, the Alliance had cleared out millions of Horde that were dominated by mutated orcs. Now, the three races added up to only a few 100,000 people, and if they really fought, it wouldn't even be enough to fill the gaps between the Alliance's teeth. So, taking advantage of the destruction of the Orthodox Horde, the three races jointly applied to join the Alliance. Chapter 1979. Strictly speaking, the three races had no territory to speak of. The Darkspear trolls and the Taurens were now in a parasitic state. Winterspring, where the Forsaken were, could hardly be considered their territory. The key was that there were a large number of blue dragons and half-dragons in Winterspring. If the Alliance wanted to provoke a conflict, based on Duque's current relationship with the Sleeping Dragon Temple, the Forsaken would be finished if they used Kalego's name to mobilize for war. The situations of the three races were different. The Taurens were the most relaxed. Historically, the Taurens loved peace and had their own traditional territory. They had never fought with any race in the Alliance. The Taurens, who believed in nature and shamanism, also had an important influence in the Cenarian Circle. Now, the Cenarian Circle was led by Malfurion. Although the Circle did not have voting rights in the Alliance, it had enough influence. After all, behind the circle stood a group of wilderness demigods led by Cenarius. Bane knew very well that if they did not join the alliance, then the fertile grassland that the Taurans had lived on for generations in Mongolia would have to say goodbye to the Taurans forever. This was a very realistic matter. After Duque announced the start of the throne conference voting on the Taurans joining the alliance, as expected, Tyrande was the first to raise her hand in agreement. Privately, Tyrande had already informed Duque. In fact, the Taurans joining the alliance was beneficial. Malfurion, who lacked political brains, had stupidly come over and put down his pride to plead with his childhood friend. As a result, Tyrande had earned a favor for no reason. Of course, Duque would not be jealous. After all, he had let Malfurion have the green grassland on his head. The voting results were out. Duque announced in a clear voice, "Very good. The throne conference has unanimously approved the motion of, let the Taurans join the alliance, proposed by the Cenarian Circle. Here, in the name of the alliance's commander, I announce that the Taurans are welcome to join the alliance." The throne conference suddenly broke out in warm applause. Bane was so moved that tears welled up in his eyes. It was not easy. His father had been murdered by the brainless Roar, and it was later proven that Magatha Grim Totem had poisoned him. After the alliance caught Magatha, they passed the traitor to Bane and let the new chief Tauran kill the enemy. Compared to personal grudges, the reproduction of the Tauran was more important. Allowing him to kill his enemies with his own hands could be considered a political show. Only by truly joining the alliance would he be able to regain his most important territory. Bane's voice choked. He was also an honest boy. "Thank you, leaders. Thank you for the recognition and support of the alliance countries. Although we Tauran love peace, we never bow to evil forces. If you need our Taurans' help in the future, please feel free to give us an order." Next, the return of the territory of Mongolia that was currently under the control of the alliance military and the reconstruction of the fallen areas would naturally be carried out. Generally speaking, the Cenarian Circle was responsible for restoring the ecology there. Other than building a railway into the collapsed Thunder Cliff area, the alliance had no other requirements. The treatment of the Minotaurs made the other two races very envious. Wajin actually thought about whether to persuade the other two leaders to let the three races join the alliance together, but he gave up. Such a method would easily infuriate the alliance. If Duque were to use the veto power that he did not have on the surface but in reality, the three races would be finished. The beast men were done for, and the three races didn't need to die with them. Next, it was the Darkspear Trolls' turn to vote. Compared to the Tauran, the Darkspear Trolls not only had no advantage, but they were at a great disadvantage. It was said that the Darkspear Trolls had nothing to do with other trolls, but what the leaders of the alliance countries thought was another matter. Not long ago, the Zandala Trolls gathered the Amani, Gurubashi, and Frost Trolls, and other troll races. They openly robbed the alliance's ports and ships and established the Zandala nation in Pandaria to fight against the alliance. This proved that the trolls had the ability to connect. This kind of thing was quite taboo. Compared to the lively scene of welcoming the Tauran into the alliance, after Duque announced the start of discussion on the Darkspear Trolls, the atmosphere of the scene became cold on the spot. It was as if a black hole had appeared in the middle of the venue, sucking away all the temperature. It was frighteningly cold. There were too many alliance countries that had conflicts and wars with the trolls in history. Just give a few examples. The Sin Dorii Kingdom, where Queen Shay was from, was preceded by Kuel Salas, who had fought with the Amani trolls for thousands of years, and was even more pressured by the Amani trolls. The previous king, Anastrian, had condescended to communicate and form an alliance with the humans, at the cost of teaching magic to the humans, and that was how the Amani trolls were defeated. On the Lordaeron continent, many kingdoms had fought with trolls. For example, the Wildhammer Dwarves, the Evil Branch, and the Withered Tree clan of the Eagle Nest Mountain. Another example was the king of the Stormguard Kingdom, Daneth Trollbane. God's mother, Trollbane, itself meant troll killer. There were also the Frostmane Trolls and Winter Axe Trolls all over the snowy mountains of the Eastern Kingdom continent, respectively harassing Alterac and Dan Molo. Further south was the Stormwind Kingdom, which often fought with the remnants of the Gurubashi Empire. It was no exaggeration to say that just by looking at the trolls' race, they had offended most of the alliance to death. Wajin knew he had to do something. He stepped forward, bowed, and put his right hand on his left shoulder. Respected leaders of the alliance, the great commander of the alliance, Wajin, the leader of the Dark Spear Trolls, would like to speak. Go ahead. Duque agreed. Wajin cleared his throat. Before voting, I would like to emphasize on behalf of the Dark Spear Trolls that there is a very big difference between trolls and trolls. Just like how humans formed today's 7 kingdoms through reproduction and competition for territory over a long period of time. The trolls have also split into many different races and kingdoms over the last 30,000 years. Wajin spent 5 minutes briefly explaining the structure of the trolls. The Zandala trolls were the ancestors of all trolls, so the Zandala tribe was a relatively special branch of trolls. They were born with a righteous name. They split into 4 major branches: forest trolls, represented by the Amani trolls. There were clans such as Fire Tree, Evil Tooth, Evil Branch, Rotten Moss, Burning Thorn and Deadwood. Sand trolls, represented by the Sand Fury clan of Zul, Farakri in the Tanaris Desert in the south of the Kalandor continent. Forest trolls, represented by the Gurubashi clan. There were clans such as Bloodtop, Dark Spear, Shatter Spear, Skullbreaker, Atal, Ai and Hikari factions. Frost trolls, represented by the Dakarai clan that established the Godak Empire in Noscent, including the Frostmane clan and the Winter Axe clan. Chapter 1980. Woken concluded, so the Dark Spear Trolls are just the most insignificant branch clan of the Trolls. They have no righteous name and have never established an empire. There have been no wars with the various countries of the Alliance, and there have been frequent wars between the Trolls in history. So I hope that the leaders can judge the Dark Spear Trolls as an independent race. Woken's speech caused a whisper among the leaders of the Alliance. To be honest, Woken had no confidence in joining the Alliance. It wasn't that he didn't try. For example, he had previously sent something similar to a visitation card to Queen Sylvanas, hoping to see the Queen. Woken was very wise. He probably knew Queen Sylvanas's position in the Alliance. As one of Duque's harem, if Queen Sylvanas took the lead in opposing, then the Dark Spear Trolls would have no chance of joining the Alliance. With a pillow talk, Duque had 1 vote, Queen Sylvanas had 1 vote, Kalia, Elucia, and Jaina each had 1 vote. The Dark Spear Trolls didn't even need to look at the votes of other countries. Unfortunately, Queen Sylvanas did not accept his request for a meeting. This undoubtedly poured cold water on Woken. Woken was very nervous. He went from the chief of a small clan to Sal's former deputy, relying on his wisdom. Through that period of time as an advisor, his knowledge was constantly growing. In fact, from the moment the Dark Spear Trolls withdrew from the tribe, he had been thinking about the future of his people. The conclusion was very discouraging, but he had to accept the reality. If he couldn't join the Alliance, the Dark Spear Trolls would never have a chance to rise. His nervousness, his apprehension, all fell into Duque's eyes. But Duque was laughing his head off. On the surface, Duque was still that high and mighty demigod, the commander-in-chief of the Alliance who held great power. However, the fluctuations in his heart were all reflected in his elemental waves. At this moment, Duque, who seemed to be doing nothing, was laughing in the Magic Net communication private chat group that only connected to his harem. Yo, Sylvanas, what if I told you that one of the futures I saw? After the tribe experienced the terrible Great Chief brain-dead roar, Woken came to power and became the Great Chief. Do you believe it? Yes. Queen Sylvie gnashed her teeth. Even if you tell me that another me will become the chief of the tribe in the future, I will believe you. Everyone knew that the traditional orcs had declined, and the reorganized tribes would definitely look for a new balance point. If it's not Woking, it's another me, or another Lorthemar. As a super powerful person who had traveled through time and space with Duque and collected other timelines, the demigod Queen Sylvanas was no fool. She knew how things would develop. He thought about how he had died in another timeline and became the ugly and cold queen of the Forsaken. His little brother, Theron, had even become a big shot. This feeling of nonsensical nonsense made Sylvanas feel extremely vexed. The girls next to them all giggled. That's why I won't let go of a talent like Wajin. Just him alone is worth taking down the entire Darkspear troll. Then why are you still waiting for Woking? Kalia was a little puzzled. In the private chat group, Duque's 3D projection shook his head and said with a narcissistic look, since ancient times, deep love can't keep people, only tricks can move people's hearts. Pfft. Queen Sylvanas was the first to react. Humph. Tyrant was a little annoyed. You bastard, you obviously tricked us like this. Jaina's illusory image waved her small fist. Although the private chat group was noisy, the voting scene was very ugly. Stormwind objects. No one expected that the first to jump out to object would be William. As someone who had fought against the jungle trolls for a long time, Stormwind did not have a good impression of the Darkspear troll branch of the jungle trolls. Considering William's identity as the Alliance's deputy commander, this vote of objection made Woking's heart skip a beat. Stormguard objects. Iron Furnace Castle objects. Eagle Nest Mountain objects. Woking's head was dizzy with the noise of the objection votes. He was in despair on the spot. The elves, who had the deepest hatred for the trolls, had not yet voted, but the humans and dwarves had jumped out first. What hope was there? Helplessness and bitterness surged in his mouth, and Woking almost mechanically turned his head to look at Sylvanas. It was not that he had any hope for Queen Sylvanas, but he was waiting for Queen Sylvanas to pass the final judgment anyway. Who knew, the green eyes that were supposed to be filled with anger were a little thought-provoking. Queen Sylvanas spoke, Mr. Woking is right about one thing. The same origin does not mean that they are all evil. Just like how we cannot confuse the Eridar tribe who joined the Burning Legion with the Drenii tribe who believe in the Holy Light. Unfortunately, I do not know much about the Darkspear troll, so the Sin Dorii kingdom has voted to abstain. This was truly a case of finding a way out at the end of the tunnel, but a glimmer of hope at the end of the tunnel. Woking was originally in despair, but who knew that the Blood Elves, who were most likely to oppose the Darkspear troll, would abstain. The Drenii tribe has decided to give the Darkspear troll a chance. We vote in favor. Imriel cast the first vote in favor. Then, Kuria followed suit. There were a lot of tricks in the voting of the throne meeting. Not counting the connections beforehand. The voting was not necessarily fair. If it was really fair, it should be announced that after the voting, everyone would write the decision, seal it in an envelope, and then announce it together. Now, although the leaders represented the will of their own tribe or country, there was a hierarchy of votes. The leader who voted first had the greatest influence, and his decision would definitely affect the leaders behind him. Moreover, the influence of Duque's harem and Kale, that was too great. The few who had the right to vote deliberately delayed the voting, forming a virtual manipulation. When all the countries and races with the right to vote had finished voting, a spectacle was formed. The votes for and against were actually tied. It just so happened that according to the rules of the Alliance Throne meeting, in addition to each country and race with the right to vote, there was also a special existence with the right to vote, and one vote was equal to 2 votes. That was the supreme commander of the Alliance, Duque. It was really strange. Perhaps some of the Alliance leaders who voted against felt that something was wrong. In fact, after today, Duque would naturally change the rules to make the voting more fair and reasonable. But today, your grandpa Duque is the one who's in charge. Woking looked at Duque with anticipation and desire. Duque said, Woking, is there anything else you want to add? Woking lowered his head and said in a deep voice, please give the Darkspear troll a chance to prove itself. As long as we can join the Alliance, the Darkspear troll is willing to lower its status and join as a vassal race. Chapter 1981. The races and organizations in the Alliance were divided into 3 classes. The first class would definitely be the countries, races, and organizations that had the right to vote in the Throne Conference. Once any member was attacked by an enemy, it would be seen as a declaration of war against all members of the alliance. The second category was the independent military, paramilitary organizations, and races that cooperated with the alliance. They had the obligation to participate in defensive battles, but not offensive ones. They had the right to propose a limited number of motions at the Alliance Throne Conference each year, but they did not have the right to vote. The most famous of this level were the Cenarian Circle, the Silver Hand Knights, the Silver Dawn, and the newly promoted Naga tribe. The third tier was the vassal races. To put it bluntly, they were equivalent to a slave army. They could only follow the decisions of the Alliance Throne unconditionally. Currently, there were murlocs, on Kiraj's bugmen, and bear monsters at this level. Wajin was willing to lower himself to the third level. This was for the future of his race. He didn't even care about his moral integrity. If the third tier entered the alliance, they would at least be on the same side. Perhaps they would be treated as cannon fodder, but at least there was hope. As a matter of fact, Naga had already been upgraded by one level, and it was said that the Kiraji insect people might also be upgraded by one level. The alliance would consider the merits of the vassal races. Unexpectedly, Duque said, Mr. Woken. The Alliance Throne was currently discussing whether or not the Darkspear Trolls had the right to join the Alliance as a first-tier race, not demotion. If you want to downgrade, please withdraw this proposal and reapply to the Alliance for a vote. Are you sure you want to do this? Wajin was stunned. He really wasn't good at pseudo-democracy. His mouth trembled, not knowing what to say. If they withdrew the proposal, wouldn't it be a waste of the leader's time? With a belly full of anger, it was possible that those who voted for it would change to vote against it the next time. Was there anyone who didn't want to work in the first rank and ran to the third rank to be a lackey? Staring at Duque for a long time, Wajin couldn't see anything. But when he thought of how Duque had allowed Sal to bring more than 100,000 orcs who had escaped to the west in order to fight against the Scourge army, Wajin understood. No. I believe in the foresight of the Alliance leaders, and I believe in Commander Marcus' judgment of the future even more. Downgrading was just to express the Darkspear Troll's strong desire to join the Alliance. The Darkspear Troll and I believe in and accept all decisions made by the Alliance. Wajin bowed and lowered his head. In a certain private Mana-net communication group, it had long since exploded. Yo, the little troll is pretty smart. Is it really like what Duque said? Tricks move people's hearts. He. Duque, you're so bad. Duque pretended not to hear the complaints of his harem. From another angle, to be able to operate in the alliance also proved that Duque's influence was unparalleled. Alright, I will announce my decision as the commander of the alliance. In reality, this is also the decision of this throne meeting. The decision is, agree. Duque finally revealed a smile. His body was lifted by the fire elements and floated down. He arrived in front of Wajin and extended his right hand. Welcome Darkspear Trolls to the alliance. Thank you. Thank you so much. Wajin's hand was very big. He tried to control the strength and angle and shook hands with Duque. As smart as Wajin was, of course, he thought that it was likely that Duque was operating. Knowing this, he still felt a burst of excitement. There was no need to be afraid anymore. The alliance was a behemoth, and as an enemy, it was undoubtedly very terrifying. Once he entered the alliance, it would be a different story. Perhaps he would be targeted in the future, but Wajin believed that as long as he and the Darkspear Trolls were truly loyal and went all out, the alliance would not regard the Darkspear Trolls as cannon fodder. For some reason, Wajin had this premonition. The last Forgotten Ones were also quite controversial. After all, it was a debate between the living and the dead. Before, when the Trolls joined the alliance, it was ultimately a battle between some races and kingdoms. The addition of the undead was a conflict between the Forgotten Ones and all the living. From the beginning, Delano was very smart not to target the first tier for the application. In the alliance, especially in the human countries, the alliance inheritance law was passed. The undead were not allowed to have most of the living's rights, such as inheritance of land and so on. Except for non-ancestral weapons and armor, the undead were not allowed to have them. The most obvious case was Alexandros Mograine. His son, Darian Mograine, continued to exist as an undead, but old Mo directly announced that the family was extinct, and all the Mograine family's inheritance would be inherited by the adopted daughter, Sally Whitemane. Although the Forgotten Ones applied to join the Alliance as a cooperative organization, it still caused a great deal of controversy. In the end, Delano agreed to a series of terms in a humiliating way before he was allowed to join the Alliance. 1. The leader of the Forgotten Ones was changed to Darian Mograine. 2. The Forgotten Ones were strictly prohibited from obtaining new members by resurrecting the corpses in the graveyard of the Alliance member states. 3. All Alliance soldiers must write a notarized will and sign a life and death contract before going to the battlefield, and decide whether to agree to resurrect as an undead if they die in battle. If they choose to resurrect as an undead, they will lose all the rights of the living, such as the most basic right to visit their loved ones. The application of living relatives would be approved separately. After tossing and turning for a day, the proposal for the 3 races to join the Alliance was finally passed. The Horde was destroyed, but the war was not over. For the time being, the orcs all over the barren land and Duroder were still stubbornly resisting in the corners of various caves. The most crucial issue was that the problem of the other main race of the Horde, the Goblins, triggered a new war. The Goblins were extremely greedy. There was nothing that couldn't be solved with a bag of gold coins. If there was, then 2 bags. Duque and other Alliance leaders really underestimated the Goblins' obsession with wealth. After the Hot Sand Conglomerate collected a huge amount of life-saving money from the Rustwater Conglomerate's goblin prince Garavix, they actually announced to the Alliance that the Horde was destroyed, the Rustwater Conglomerate had left the Horde, and Garavix was innocent. The Alliance had no right to ask the neutral Hot Sand Conglomerate to hand over Garavix. In private, the Hot Sand Conglomerate contacted the Alliance. I can hand over Garavix, but please give me some money. Not much, just 10 years of taxes from the Alliance. Otherwise, the Hot Sand Conglomerate would be exempted from taxes and inspections when doing business in the Alliance. There was a saying that you wouldn't die if you didn't court death. The Goblins thought that the current Alliance was just an ordinary organization that had to give face to the Goblins. Who knew that the arrogance of the Goblins angered the Alliance? The Throne Council voted that because the Hot Sand Conglomerate harbored the war criminal Garavix and a large number of tribal members who fled to Gadgetsan in the Tanaris Desert, the Alliance announced that it would deny the Hot Sand Conglomerate's self-proclaimed neutrality and declare war on the other 2 Goblin consortiums, the Venture Capital Company and the Hot Sand Conglomerate. Chapter 1982. The Goblins were dumbfounded on the spot. The Alliance's move was undoubtedly a declaration of war against all the Goblins. The Goblins claimed to have 5 major trading princes. No one knew who the hell the other 2 were. Were they interstellar goblins or some other goblins? Anyway, there were only 3 goblins on planet Azeroth. In addition to the tribe twice, there was the Rustwater Conglomerate that had invested in Old Jianghu for 49 years. There was also the hated Venture Capital Company and the Hot Sand Conglomerate that had the most territory on Azeroth. Needless to say, the Venture Capital Company was the most hated financial group. This group of bastards dared to trample all the laws in the world for money. They mined our resources everywhere, abused explosives to blow up fish, used large amounts of mercury to extract gold, turned rivers into rivers of death, and used goblin loggers to secretly cut wood in the Night Elves' territory. Anyway, after causing trouble everywhere, they would just leave. The Night Elves and Stormwind had suffered great losses at their hands. The Alliance announced early in the morning that they would kill every employee of the Venture Capital Company they saw. Unfortunately, the Goblins were all the same in the eyes of the Alliance. As long as they were caught and no key evidence was found, every employee of the Venture Capital Company would lie and say that they were not from the company. As for the Hot Sand Group, it was actually very strong on the surface. Its headquarters was in Gadgetsan. As for the other strongholds, Winterspring Valley and Perpetual Hope Town should be a direct branch. The one who occupied Booty Bay was the rich Livigaz. Livigaz had his own power, which was the Blackwater Bandits. Booty Bay should be considered a feudal lord in the Hot Sand group. Unfortunately, the trolls of Zul-Gurub were released by Du and destroyed Booty Bay in one go. The trolls destroyed Livigaz's power, and the alliance unkindly occupied Booty Bay and made it the new capital of Kul-Gurub. Rattan city was the territory of Gaz-Ruvi, a rising star. Gaz-Ruvi could be regarded as a spiritual tribe. He had original shares in the tribe and provided a lot of help in the process of the tribe establishing Orgrimmar. In return, he also obtained the control of the Golden Sea route between East Bay and Booty Bay in the north of Kalimdor, thus rising in a short time. Until Booty Bay collapsed, he operated transit trade from the tribe to the alliance, specializing in trading goods that the tribe was embarrassed to sell publicly. But ever since the alliance and the horde became enemies, he had suffered huge losses. The Hot Sand Group owned several major trade cities and had considerable business all over the world. It was even involved in the slave trade and the operation of the Bloody Arena. In addition, he had more than 100,000 security forces and mercenaries. When necessary, he could summon troops from the employees and slaves who served the Hot Sand conglomerate and build a terrifying army of hundreds of thousands of people. Most of the time, no one would even consider going to war with the Hot Sand conglomerate. They were also relatively loosely organized plutocrats. Under the alliance's sanctions, all trade was blocked. This made the gnomes even more active. If the horde wanted to steal the alliance's technology or resources, they had to go through them. The tribe's reliance on the Hot Sand Goblins nurtured the arrogance of the Hot Sand Goblins. From a prince of trade to a second-tier trading magnate, and then to a trading tycoon. No one cared about the alliance. They had never thought that if the tribes that could keep the alliance in check no longer existed, then their so-called neutral third party would be meaningless. What's more, if someone else was beaten, it would be like mud falling from their pants. The goblins were great. There was no need to look. Their pants must be full of sh*t. Even slander would be saved. There was no family in the alliance that did not hate the goblins. In terms of the civilian side, the goblins had been implementing a variety of theft and abduction policies for hundreds of years. In addition, in order to help the horde steal technology, the Rustwater conglomerate borrowed a lot from the Hot Sand Group, which made the alliance's tribes angry. As long as they did trade, no matter how careful they were, there were often people who fell into the trap from time to time. For example, the Kurtalas, Alterac, and the Marcus family. The more they did trade, the more they would fall into the trap. Often, the Hot Sand borrowed the hands of ordinary people to make various shell companies to cause trouble. It could be said that there were new and old grudges. In the military, there was even more blood debt. They stole all kinds of technology, machines, and ships. The most important thing was that the dignified King William of Stormwind was sold as a slave gladiator when he lost his memory. Afterward, Stormwind pursued the responsibility of the Hammer of Misfortune Arena. They directly changed the boss, saying that the former boss had run away and did not admit anything. Every year, many beautiful humans, night elves, and blood elf girls were abducted and sold. Many strong people were accidentally deceived and sold as slave gladiators, losing their lives in the arena. At the throne meeting, Duque proposed to start a war against the Hot Sand Group and the venture capital companies that shielded the Rustwater conglomerate. He received a unanimous vote in favor. It was not until the Alliance's flying fleet attacked and the heavy rain of artillery shells poured over the desert city of Gadgetzan that the Hot Sand conglomerate's boss, Hot Sand, realized that the Alliance was serious. No. No. The Alliance has no right to do this. I want to protest. Oh my God. My money. My money, damn, that group of Alliance mad dogs. Gather all the mercenaries, we will fight the Alliance dogs. Hot Sand was nervous and kept changing his orders. Just as he was about to go all out, he received a shocking piece of news. The number and quality of mercenaries recruited were far less than expected. What happened? That group of bastards, who are like sand in the desert, didn't dare to come when they saw the money this time. Hot Sand slammed the table angrily. No. The main thing is, our best mercenaries died in Theramore." The reply of his men made Hot Sand's heart fall into the abyss. Tricks, it was all King tricks. When the horde attacked, Theramore's defense was empty because the Alliance had withdrawn their elites early. Instead, they urgently recruited mercenaries from neutral trade cities such as Gadgetsan. The Alliance used mercenaries as cannon fodder to resist brainless roars, knockoff focusing Rainbow. In that battle, because the bounty offered by the Alliance was extremely high, it attracted the most capable mercenaries of the entire Hot Sand group to go to Theramore. Afterward, even though the Alliance fulfilled its promise and paid all the pensions. In fact, the Alliance had greatly weakened the war potential of the Goblins at that time. The Goblins did not have a modern air force. The Goblins, who also used technology, could not compare to the Alliance who used modern warfare. The Dark Portal 29, December 20th, 3 months after the destruction of the Orthodox Horde, the Goblins were destroyed. Chapter 1983. Hey, hey! Is someone trying to whitewash the Goblins? Come on. Saying that the Goblins were actually all saints, a race that performed glorious feats in order to save the people who were struggling in misery, ugh. Alright, even Duque couldn't make it up anymore. As an organization that prided itself on justice, the Alliance was sincerely opposed to genocide. Every time a tribe was destroyed, there would be a group of people who were spiritually tribal, jumping out to complain, and most of them were clergymen. Perhaps this group of brainless people thought that Duque was too easy to talk to, and always forgot that Duque was a demigod. They thought that their boss was the holy light, the Naru, and that Duque and they couldn't even pee in the same pot. Since they couldn't even pee in the same pot, why would Duque care about them? With a direct order, these noisy people were forcibly recruited to the front line, and then in the mopping up battle, they were chopped by the remnants of the traditional tribes who couldn't even read and could only speak the orc language with axes. As for the Goblins, no one really whitewashed them. Even the Holy Light Church wouldn't pity these bastards. It was said that the church would receive hundreds of reports every season, saying that the Goblins themselves or sent people to steal money from the church's donation box using magnets. Those brainless people would tie magnets with ropes and suck the money up from the opening of the donation box. Duque thought back to the Goblin player in the game, who was also like that. How the hell did he find out that he was sold as a slave right after coming out, and by his own boss, Galavix? So, the Goblins that angered everyone in the world were wiped out just like that. The Alliance wiped out all the Goblins that were under a meter tall and had 5 short limbs. Interestingly, after the Alliance announced the policy that as long as they brought the corresponding number of Goblin heads, the Goblin employees of other races would not be held accountable, the ones who killed the Goblins the most were the employees who had been employed, by the Goblins. This really led to the collapse of the Hot Sand conglomerate and the venture capital corporation. In just 3 months, the evil, supposedly neutral, race of Goblins was wiped out just like that. The speed was even faster than the speed of wiping out the remaining orcs. On the other hand, among the beast men, there was actually an organized clan that had escaped. Thrall had married Agna during the cataclysm. She was a shaman of the Frostwolf clan and a traditional Mag Han orc with healthy brown skin. When Sar was supposed to have died in the volcanic eruption of Orgrimmar, she led the Frostwolf clan hiding in Razor Swamp, taking advantage of the chaos when the Alliance was clearing out the Horde, through a long secret passage unknown to the Alliance, all the way into the Thousand Needles, and then turned into the dense forest area of Feralas. Perhaps Sal had already prepared an escape route, or was it Agnes' judgment? It didn't matter anymore. Given that the Alliance had Oro's descendants, these powerful earth-boring bugs, Agnes' Frostwolf tribe was like a grasshopper after autumn. They wouldn't be able to last long. If he caught Agna, he would know everything. Even so, the Throne Conference officially announced the end of the war and set the following 1st of January as the Victory Day. This day happened to be the first day of the 30 years of the Dark Portal. It was ironic that the year when the Dark Portal opened and the Alliance was established was the first year of the Dark Portal. That year, it was the day when the Horde invaded Azeroth and set off the flames of war throughout the Eastern Kingdom. 30 years later, Duque, who had a part in establishing the Alliance, personally ended all of this. With a start and an end, such a founder of the alliance was more trustworthy. Woken met Duque in private at the Duke's mansion in Stormwind City. He didn't beat around the bush and asked directly, "I know that it will be quite embarrassing for me to ask the following questions in my current position. And it is likely to cause you displeasure, but I still want to." Before Woken could finish, he was interrupted by Duque, "About the orc captives?" "Yes." Woken was a little disappointed. Duque glanced at Woken. Really, Duque admired Woken's courage and the friendship between him and Thrall. Whether the trolls could stay in the alliance or not was decided by Duque's words. If a member of the first group of members proposed an expulsion motion, then as long as 2/3 of the members voted in favor, they could be directly expelled from the alliance. With the situation of the trolls, it was really easy to get them to leave. Even so, Woken took a huge risk and came to ask Duque. "Sigh." Duque sighed. Even if the Horde was weaker than the alliance, it was still a behemoth. Duque dug countless pits and assassinated the Horde countless times, but in the end, he succeeded in destroying the Horde. He could launch a massacre against the notorious goblins, but he couldn't publicly order the orcs not to be captured. All the alienated orcs who drank the Yashiji Blackheart water were killed. However, the efficiency of the Horde was simply terrible. The Kukuran guards were all sent out, but the work of feeding the elixir to the orc civilians was still too slow. In Duque's vision, of course, it would be best if all the orcs became alienated orcs, so that the alliance would have an excuse to kill the orcs. But knowing that there was a threat like Yashiji, the alliance didn't have much reason to delay. The result was that the alliance successfully destroyed the Orthodox Horde and bombed Orgrimmar to the point where it could never be rebuilt. It also gave various hints to the military to let the soldiers kill. Even so, the alliance still captured nearly 200,000 orcs, most of whom were women and children. When they were captured, these women and children were being forced by the Kukuran guards to Orgrimmar to drink Yashiji Blackheart water. It could be foreseen that as the war continued, this number would get higher and higher. The order to kill women and children could be used on the goblins, but not on the orcs. After all, the orcs had cooperated with the alliance in many wars, such as in the Silithus Desert, when they fought with the alliance against the Kiraj bug people who belonged to Thun at the time. Although the orcs were abominable, they were often devils, but they also had an angel side. It was this state of conflict that made the leaders of the alliance worried. The alliance is the alliance. The alliance will never kill prisoners of war. Duque's words first made Wajin's heart rise to the clouds, and then stepped on his heart to hell with the next sentence. But the alliance will not bear the cost of food and accommodation of hundreds of thousands of captives for no reason. That is a great waste of manpower, money, and materials, so I plan to exile all the Horde prisoners. Exile. Wajin's eyes widened in an instant, and he immediately understood. Draenor is being destroyed, isn't that asking them to die? Duque's mouth curled into a slightly cruel smile. I have to correct you. Draenor is being destroyed, not already destroyed. Chapter 1984. Woken was speechless. Duque continued. As a civilized and intelligent race, even in the first battle of the Dark Portal 30 years ago, the Horde slaughtered so many towns and villages in Stormwind, but they didn't kill all the captives. Although it was a bit inhumane for King Tyrrhenas of Lordaeron to make the orcs slave gladiators, he didn't kill the captives. Since the Alliance doesn't intend to do that, it's at least giving the orcs a way out. 5 years ago, Draenor was definitely too crowded for nearly 3 million orcs. They had to eliminate themselves according to tradition. For less than 300,000 orcs, that place is still very spacious. Besides, as long as there is another amazing guy like Dan among the orcs, they can still go to other planets. Of course, we won't hand over control of the Dark Portal to the orcs. There were also some things that Duque wouldn't tell Woken, such as installing a batch of bombs in Nagrand that could blow up the entire Nagrand region. If they wanted to make a giant bomb with the goal of blowing up a planet, this method was obviously not reliable. It would be much easier to lower the target and change it to a second collapse strike on the already destroyed Draenor. Duque had already studied the geological structure of Draenor. Without the core and other things, Draenor purely relied on gravity waves that could not be explained by science at this stage to attract the air on the surface. The geological structure of the entire Draenor continent was far more fragile than most people thought. The void was destroying the land of Draenor, and at the same time, it was sucking away the air, water, and various nutrients on the continent. This made the land of Draenor like a crispy biscuit. Not to mention hitting it with a stick, even a little bit of force could cause the whole continent to collapse. In fact, the collapse of Draenor was a non-linear acceleration process. When the collapse occurred more than 50% of the original collapse, the speed of the collapse would accelerate exponentially. The Burning Legion could no longer use the orcs to invade Azeroth. Once they were discovered by Duque, all the orcs would be sent to heaven with a bang. As for whether the orcs would really go to heaven, it would depend on their luck. Duque was already very kind not to order the slaughter of the orcs. Woken did not say anything. He bowed deeply, "Thank you for your kindness." When he looked up again, Duque found that Woken was smiling. This was the first time Wajin had smiled since he joined the Alliance, although the troll's smile was always a bit creepy. "What? No, I and the tribe. I can finally let go of all my attachment and reluctance. Next, if the Alliance wants the Dark Spear Trolls to contribute their full strength, I think the Dark Spear Trolls will be happy to do so." Wajin chuckled. "Huh? What about before? Forget the hypocritical politician pleasantries. Trolls aren't good at that." To be honest, it was more out of helplessness before. Walker shrugged. Because the troll's arms were too long, the shrug seemed a little exaggerated. "Go get ready. The jungles of Pandaria need you." The Pandaria continent was dominated by jungles and mountainous terrain. Previously, Brainless Roar had released a bunch of orcs from a small tribe there, but he didn't bring them back when he left. After all, he still wanted to occupy the fertile land of Pandaria. This batch of orcs was only a few thousand, which was not much. It was good to invest in the Night Elves, but it was better to not let the Dark Spear Trolls be idle. Moreover, this was also a proof of allegiance. On the other side, after the Alliance officially announced the end of the war and set January 1st as Victory Day, a grand victory and celebration ceremony for 7 consecutive days, the people of the Alliance were excited. Oh. We won. The damn tribe is finally finished. Long live the Alliance. On the 4 continents of Azeroth, in the taverns of every Alliance territory, the boss made the same decision: free beer today. La 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 la. In the taverns, in the streets and alleys, there were revelers everywhere. They raised their beer bottles high, drank to their heart's content, shouted, and toasted and hugged every Alliance member they bumped into. Even the most serious Alliance army, the Throne Conference ordered, after the necessary security forces were arranged, non-duty officers and soldiers were allowed to celebrate, but the guards must not make any mistakes. Smiles weaved on the faces of every Alliance person. Tears also hung at the corners of the eyes of every Alliance person who had lost friends and family. Without the need for organization, all the cemeteries outside the cities were quickly filled with people who came to visit the graves. A simple flower that was picked by the roadside. One of the most common white candles. It was filled with the grief of the living for the dead. Dad. Do you understand? The Alliance won, and the tribe was finally destroyed. Your soul in heaven can rest in peace. A one-armed middle-aged man in military uniform used his remaining hand to caress the unusually smooth tombstone that had no edges. Mom, I survived. I followed your wishes. I gave birth to many children. Jeff and John gave birth to grandchildren for you. Unfortunately, Tommy died in the 3rd battle of the Dark Portal. A woman in her 50s sobbed in front of the tombstone. Child, light a candle for your granduncle. If he didn't block the orc's axe for me, there wouldn't be you and your father. An old man pointed at his grandson. It had been 30 years. The long war had created so many tragedies. From the invasion of the orcs, to the Scourge army wreaking havoc, to the arrival of the Burning Legion, to the rampaging dragons, to the elemental lords and the ancient gods causing destruction, the people of Azeroth, especially the people of the Alliance, had suffered too much. Although everyone knew that the Burning Legion would return within 10 years, at least the complete destruction of the tribe represented the end of an era, as well as the end of a grudge. The days had to continue. The survivors of that year hugged each other and fell asleep in relief. From the second day onwards, it was the real celebration and revelry. The official victory day announced by the Alliance was the 1st of January. But before that, the people had spontaneously started a large-scale celebration. Countless ideas for celebration were created, and it also inspired countless poets and singers to write. Duque waved his hand and had the troops that had been assembled but not sent out move out to participate in the Battle of Kalimdor and the Pandaria continent to wipe out the remaining enemies. Instead, 90% of the troops that had participated in the battle were replaced. The people rushed to the various airports and seaports, quietly waiting for the return of each batch of warriors, giving them the most fanatical cheers. People sent flowers, wine, lofty praises, and hot kisses from young girls. The damn war was finally over, even if it was temporary. Chapter 1985. With Duque's help, Azeroth finally had an express. Although he had learned from the Great Celestial Empire that all news or reports that had been circulated for more than 100 copies had to be approved by the Alliance News Bureau, it was still an improvement. Almost every day at 3 o'clock in the morning, over 300,000 copies of newspapers would be printed in the major cities of the Alliance and transported to the cities and towns of the Alliance by train and regular airship flights. In the Azeroth Daily, a writer wrote, "The legendary piece has not appeared on the land of Azeroth for 30 years. Our people and soldiers are either at war or preparing for war. No one knows what kind of enemy will come next year or tomorrow. At least this time, the war between the Alliance and the Horde has come to an end. Thank you, our greatest hero and commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus. Look at his achievements. He led more than 10 kingdoms and races out of the quagmire of war. He used his genius ideas and realizable inventions to arm the entire Alliance army. He also promoted the Alliance's economy and revived several countries that had long been destroyed in the flames of war. 30 years ago, when our parents and grandparents were still using the most primitive plows to plow the land, eating black bread that looked like wood dregs, and vegetables and fruits that were full of moths, our ancestors were still using the most primitive plows to farm. Who would have thought that 30 years later, not only would our lives not be destroyed by the flames of war, but we would also be able to eat all kinds of bread and snacks, fresh fruits and vegetables, and live a more luxurious lifestyle than the nobles of 30 years ago. It took the ancestors of the Rin family in Stormwind almost 3 years to reach today's Stormwind City from Torrential Castle. But now, an ordinary worker only needed to work for 3 days to buy an airship ticket from Riptide Castle to Stormwind City. We'll reach our destination in another 3 days. Tourism, what an extravagant word. In the 2,800 years of human history, the term tourism was born for the first time. Because in the past 3,000 years, leaving any inhabited area meant danger and death. Only the bravest hunters or swordsmen would step on the land outside the villages and towns alone. And now, no dangerous creature can be found within 5 kilometers of any Alliance settlement with more than 1,000 people. The Alliance isn't born noble and destined to be great. In the first 15 years of the Alliance was purely a military organization that fought wars against foreign enemies and political games against internal enemies. It was only after Duke Marcus came to power that the Alliance was built into a pan-racial military, economic, and political organization. That's why the allied nations today encompass the 4 continents of Azeroth. Praise the Alliance. Praise Duke Marcus. At least before our great leader retires from the mortal world, there is no need to worry about the collapse of the world. Just as Sir Marcus said, the Burning Legion is destined to make a comeback. That's not important. We believe that under the leadership of our leader, even the powerful Burning Legion will one day become the most magnificent chapter in the history of the Alliance. Let's celebrate our victory. At the same time, get ready for a new challenge. Jaina finished reading the newspaper and threw it aside. Yo, Duque, the newspaper is praising you so much. Yes, yes, praise me more. Duque shamelessly replied while hugging Tyron's butt and madly attacking with Duque's divine sword. After the war, Duque's harem became idle, and Duque also got busy. After defeating Tyrant, he entered a short period of time as a sage, and Duque spoke. Sigh, you women are so strange. You're clearly immortal, forever 18 years old. Why do you have to make a child? Duke had only said one sentence when he was attacked by the harem and spat on. This is the inheritance of life. A woman without a child is not a complete woman. Even the businesswoman Jaina cupped her face. Sigh, seeing that everyone has a child, I suddenly want one too. Yes, perhaps this is the so-called herd effect. Everyone does it, and I want to do it too. Alicia nodded in agreement. Ugh, I've seen so many dead people during the Qingming festival, but I've never wanted to die. Duque complained. What are you pretending for? Queen Sylvie, who had been groaning and gasping for breath after being beaten up by Duke, suddenly unleashed her might and kicked Duke away with a lightning-fast kick. Oh, yes, the Qingming festival was not the main point. If Duque could create a Valentine's Day, he could create a Qingming festival too. The main point was that this might be the last peaceful period. No one could say for sure if they could withstand the Burning Legion's attack. If it was a one-sided battle, it would be better if they did not die. No matter who won or lost, it would be a relief. What they were most afraid of was an 8-year war, or even a war that would last for several centuries. After the war, those who were supposed to have children had all been born, but how many were left? Not to mention Jaina and Alicia, even Tyrant was tempted. Duque looked at the harem that he had single-handedly built. It was upgraded from being surrounded by beauties to a kindergarten, from a small class to a small class, and then to a large class. Just thinking about it made him feel a little hopeless. Women were creatures. Once they had children, men could be thrown aside. Thinking about how gentle and caring Aurelia and Sasha were in the past, but now. Sorry, her daughter was first, she was second, and you, Duque, third. Duque had an ominous feeling that he was about to become the third person in a group. Tyrant came over and caught Duque's sword with one hand. Yo! Aren't you very powerful? Since you have the ability to deal with us, you should satisfy our wish to have children. Wait. What about Elun? Elun allowed it. Seeing Jaina, Alicia, and Tyrant surround him, Duque lamented in his heart. Even with tears in her eyes, he had to take responsibility for the girls he had sex with. The only thing that Duque was glad about was that humans did not seem to get along with the Draenei and dragons. But when he became a true god, these problems would no longer be a problem. For the first time, Duque did not want to become a true god. It was finally the 1st of January in the 30th year of the Dark Portal. The Alliance celebrated the annihilation of the Horde and held a grand victory ceremony in New Lordaeron City. At the same time, they commemorated the 30th anniversary of the opening of the Dark Portal and the 30th anniversary of the Alliance. Strictly speaking, the Alliance was not even 30 years old. After all, the Alliance was only formed at the end of the first year of the Dark Portal. But who would care about such a happy day? Chapter 1986. Lordaeron in this life was not destroyed by the orcs like in history, but it did not escape Arthas's attack either. History had changed too much. Queen Cia did not become an immortal, and Anastrian did not defend Lordaeron. As a result, Lordaeron did not change its name to Undercity. Queen Kalia had been on the throne for 15 years. On the surface, she ruled by doing nothing, and openly admitted that she was a mascot. Lordaeron's authority was magically divided into two parts. Most of the military power was in the hands of High Lord Mograine and the military nobles led by the Abendis family. To be precise, the current leader of the military was Brigid Abendis, the daughter of the former Supreme General Abendis, who was now missing. However, perhaps it was because King Tyrrhenus had controlled the Silver Hand, so the Silver Hand Knights under Kalia's instructions became a strange existence. It was fully funded by Lordaeron, but had autonomy. It could recruit people independently from the Lordaeron military, and it was a strange existence that fought independently. The most interesting thing was that the economy of the entire Lordaeron was strictly controlled by Alusia. Queen Alterac held the position of Lordaeron's deputy finance minister, which was the only one in the world. This was Duque's economic circle. But no one could say that Alusia was not one of them. Under Alusia single-handedly, in just 15 years, Lordaeron, which was originally very strong, became terrifyingly rich. In the end, no one knew how rich Lordaeron was. Anyway, according to the current military expenditure, Alusia had prepared enough military expenditure for them for 10 years. The accounts were open, the funds were clear, and the gold in the inventory could be checked at any time. Of course, the richest could no longer be considered as the traditional three families, Alterac, Kurtiras, and the Marcus family. The richest organization was now the Alliance. Every 4 years, or when new members joined, the Alliance would review the military expenditure, the number of troops, and the distribution of armaments. In principle, the stronger countries were obliged to contribute more money, manpower, and resources. This was an obligation. The opposite of an obligation was also a right. For example, when conquering a new territory, the stronger countries that fulfilled their obligations had the right to get better land and gain more spoils of war. With the Alliance's consecutive victories, even if they had to pay a large amount of compensation and war dividends according to the Alliance's strict rules, the countries would still be able to make a profit. It was more like a snowball that was getting bigger and bigger. This time, when they heard that they were going to attack the horde, all the countries became extremely excited and clamored for their own countries or races to send more troops. More investment meant dividends. Now comes the harvest season. There was actually no direct benefit to destroying the Orthodox tribes. After all, Duroder and the Barren Lands, the two traditional territories of the Barren Lands, were quite poor, and the minerals they produced were mostly low-grade copper and tin. But it was different if they destroyed the rich and heartless goblins. The Rusty Water Conglomerate, the Venture Capital Company, and the Hot Sand Group, these three companies were King rich. This time, the Alliance was ruthless. They announced early in the morning that if the employees did not betray them, kill them, or report their bosses for hiding the money, the employees would also be sentenced to death. Goblins wanted money even after they died. Many of the employees weren't gnomes. If they lost their lives, what was the use of money? In addition, the goblin tycoons, giants, and trade princes were all stained with blood. Every coin in their coffers was flowing with the smell of blood. If you successfully report your boss illegal gains, the Alliance will give 1% of the total amount as a tax-free bonus after confiscating the illegal gains of the goblins. This will reward the informant and guarantee the privacy of the informant. This policy became a fatal blow to all the goblins. Not to mention the employees of other races who reported the goblins. Even if they knew that the Alliance wanted to kill all the goblins, there were still many bitter goblins who continued to report with the mentality of wanting their bosses to die first. As of December 30th, the Alliance had seized an astronomical amount of wealth from the goblins. How much was it? Well, compared to the total of more than 20 countries and organizations in the Alliance in 29 years, it was about 100 times. It sounded exaggerated, but considering that this was the accumulation of countless black-hearted goblins for thousands of years, it was not surprising. It was ironic that when the Alliance's troops were at the gates, several major trade princes were only willing to take out 1,000th of the money from their coffers to reward and boost morale. They even spent 1,000th of the money to bribe the high-ranking officials and generals of the Alliance. This reminded Du Ku of the Chongjin Emperor of the Ming dynasty. Those ministers whose hearts were rotten to the bone, when Li Zicheng's troops were at the gates, the emperor asked them to donate some money to boost morale, but no one was willing to fork out any money, as if whoever did was an idiot. In the end, the roaming king broke into the imperial capital and killed all the officials and rich families. It was only then that the group of idiots cried out in fear and begged for mercy. Unfortunately, it was too late. History was always shockingly similar. The goblins were greedy for money, and they were indeed unrepentant. The funny thing was that there were enemies in this world that money couldn't deal with. For example, people like Duque who didn't care about money. To be precise, Duque only cared about the lives of the goblin trade princes and all their money. No matter how stubborn the goblins were, they couldn't withstand the soul torture of the Eridar Gemini. In just a few moments, they even poured out the goblin girls that they had peeped on bathing when they were young. This huge sum of money caused a huge commotion among the higher-ups of the alliance. Not to mention the other leaders, even a boorish man like William was excited. Duque stopped them, that's right. According to the laws of the alliance, this huge sum of money is undoubtedly the spoils of war. However, before we proceed to the throne conference to vote on whether or not to divide this sum of money, I have something to say. That is, money is only meaningful when one is still alive, and when one's descendants still have a future. If the Azeroth is destroyed, then no matter how many gold coins there are, they will just be scrap metal. The Burning Legion is destined to come again. At the earliest, it will be 5 years, and at the latest, it will be no more than 10 years. I've said this a long time ago. If you doubt my words, you can choose to leave the Alliance and live a comfortable life in your little kingdom. Then, you can quietly wait for the arrival of the apocalypse. However, when that time comes, there won't be any salvation, and there won't be any army from the Alliance to save you and your people. Not to mention that the Alliance won't have any extra troops at that time. Even if they do, they will just quietly watch you die. At this point, Duque's tone was already very heavy. The next time the Burning Legion comes, there won't be tens of thousands of evil demons arriving on this land, but hundreds of thousands. Even if the planet Azeroth's protective spell formation is still effective, considering the weakening of the dragon aspect, the worst-case scenario is that the Legion can easily send an army of over 10 million evil demons. Chapter 1987. With such a large number of demons, would our warriors be able to kill them all with ordinary swords? Even if every demon stretched out their neck for your soldiers to chop, they wouldn't be able to kill them all. Duque punched the armrest of his seat. That's right, we have a huge sum of money now. But after a modern war, would anyone dare to say that they have enough money to spend? If a main fleet of the Alliance were to fire at full force for an hour, the cost of ammunition alone would eat up a year's worth of taxes for a small country. Moreover, before the Burning Legion comes again, I predict that the modern war will be upgraded to a future war that will cost even more. When Duque said this, the old wolf king Xion, Daneth Trollbane, and the other kings of the small countries all felt their faces burn slightly. This amount of wealth was too exaggerated. Even the real rich countries like Alterac were envious. The ones who cared about the dividends the most were the previously declining countries like Gilneas and Stromgard. On the other side, Duque's explanation was still continuing. Our future war path is clear. We have a complete line of technology that we can imitate. For example, the Titan space technology. In addition, we also need to develop giant robots similar to the Blood Elf magic puppets. This is to make up for the physical difference between us intelligent races and the Burning Legion's mainstream demon soldiers. Also, to prevent our cities from being directly attacked from the sky, we need to build a large number of underground fortresses as the last refuge for our citizens. All of this requires a huge investment, and it is very likely that it will not be effective in the short term. Everyone had money, and were excitedly preparing to make a fortune. Duque, the leader of the Alliance, had the clearest mind. Even with the glorious achievement of destroying the Horde, he could still clearly see the future. Duque could clearly see the changes in the leader's eyes. It was a change in mentality. He then began to conclude his speech. Of course, victory needs to be celebrated. I propose that the wealth seized from the goblins be distributed according to the rules set by the Alliance. I emphasize that this is only the distribution of ownership. 90% of the funds from the spoils of war will be reinvested into the Alliance under the name of special funds provided by the various countries for the development and production of military technology. All R&D and production accounts are open and transparent. Any allied country is allowed to send a monitoring team of no more than 100 people to monitor the movement and use of funds. As for the 10%, it's still a huge sum to any country or race. I hope everyone can put their money to better use. For example, improving the living standards of the people, speeding up the construction of infrastructure, underground air raid shelters, etc. Instead of squandering the money. Duque finished his explanation. The alliance's temporary bill was naturally passed. He had done his best and kept most of the money in the alliance to prevent his subordinates from courting death. People tend to be extravagant when they have money. This kind of death-seeking nature was inevitable. Even though they knew that the Burning Legion would come in the future, knowing that their boss was rich, all sorts of requests to spend money still flew to the hands of the various kings like snowflakes. All of them were pompous and dignified, celebrating a great victory. What kind of request to build a statue to commemorate the great king? All sorts of excuses. It was like a woman saying she didn't want anything when she was dating, but when it came to marriage, she immediately said, once in a lifetime, wanted wedding photos, wanted a kilogram, oh, a carat diamond ring. Anyway, the mascot Queen Kalia didn't understand. Once she was happy, it was equivalent to half a year's worth of national taxes being allocated. Elogia could not suppress it at all and only managed to cut down 70% of it. In the end, beep beep beep, the loud sound of trumpets rang throughout the city. Starting from 10 kilometers outside Rotterdam, there was a trumpeter every 20 meters. There were humans, Drenii, dwarves, gnomes, high elves, Tauren, and trolls. Damn, it felt like the Rotterdam had invited all the trumpeters in the alliance, and even trained the Tauren and trolls. This was just the appetizer. Starting from the military camp where the ceremony was held, the entire road was paved with marble. That's right, in just 10 days, the Rotterdam had airlifted over 10,000 tons of marble tiles from Alterac's warehouse. In order to deal with the crushing of tanks during the triumph ceremony, it was standard practice to attach rubber accessories to the tank tracks. The Rotterdam even used a large number of mages to solidify the ground with earth magic. More than 100,000 Rotterdam people worked for free, working 3 shifts to lay the ground. Within 10 days, they laid out a beautiful white jade-like, Triumph Avenue. On both sides of the avenue, there were more than 20 gorgeous mage towers. By the way, none of these mage towers were originally here. The people of Rotterdam used the most powerful flying transport ships to hoist the 7-story mage towers that were strengthened with magic. Damn it, Duque had just suggested that the electricity from the power plant should be used for high-voltage transmission, and that they could use the flying transport ships to hoist the electricity towers. The Rotterdam people had a wild imagination and made mage towers. It was to use the mage towers to provide elemental fireworks throughout the triumph ceremony. When it came to luxury, Duque was convinced. Countless girls from the Rotterdam kingdom were standing on a high platform made of prefabricated steel frames, scattering fresh petals to the passing soldiers. It was winter, how could there be so many petals? At first, Duque regretted teaching the Rotterdam people how to grow plants in a greenhouse. Now, he found out that even the Cenarian Circle druids had been persuaded, bribed, to help with natural magic to create flowers and plants. Hundreds of thousands of people took the additional flying ship flights of the Alliance and rushed over from all over the Alliance. It was to witness this sacred ceremony. Their cheers were louder and louder, surging through the clouds in the sky and reaching the peak of the clouds. Everyone, please take a look. This is the 7th Legion of Stormwind, formed after His Majesty Varian Rin regained power in the kingdom. This glorious legion has participated in major battles such as the Battle of the Outland of Draenor, the Battle of the Well of the Sun, and the Battle of Northrend. It is an unyielding army with a strong will. Sally still looked young and beautiful. She had solidified the age of her body at 18 years old. As a member of the Alliance's hero group, no matter who asked, Duque would definitely give them an eternal meal. Now that the Bronze Dragon King Nozdorma was still alive, eternal life was a small matter. Actually, as one of the famous dog and dog couples in the game, Sally was also very popular among the players. Back then, Duque had also thought about pushing down Sally, but his harem was too inflated. There were many scabbards, but there was only one divine sword. Using a limited sword to deal with an infinite scabbard, Duque thought about it and gave up. Chapter 1988. Next up is the trump card of Lordaeron, the Scarlet Cross Army. Sally's voice became more impassioned, and one could hear the pride in her voice. Ever since the second battle at the Dark Portal, I've never seen anything like it. The Scarlet Cross Army has been fighting on the front lines against evil. Its glorious history can be traced back to the establishment of the Mograine territory 300 years ago. Cheers, screams, noises, and the voices of girls professing their love reverberated in the sky above Lordaeron for a long time. Duque sat at the head of the table. On his right was William, who was also the deputy commander, and on his left was the demigod Queen Sylvanas. If one were to expand further, it would be his extremely exaggerated harem. It wasn't Duque's intention. After all, his wives happened to be the leaders of the strongest countries or races in the alliance. My wives are all queens. This joke had been used many times by the middle and lower classes of the alliance. If not for Duke's status as a demigod and the fact that he had signed a law for the welfare of his male compatriots, commonly known as the Harem Act, Duke would have been beaten to the sh*t by everyone who envied him. There was basically no regret when one reached Duque's level. If it wasn't for the fact that he knew that the Burning Legion was still coming to cause trouble, Duke even had the guts to announce his retirement right now. He would go home and hug his wives. The victory ceremony was extremely grand and noisy, but as a transmigrator, Duque really didn't care about it. When the guards of honor sent by the various countries passed by the Alliance leader's platform, Duque stood on the skull of a 10-story tall fire elemental giant. After inspecting the troops, Duque began his routine speech. 30 years ago, the Burning Legion's hands finally reached Azeroth. The fallen titan Sardras did not hesitate to plot for more than 200 years just to possess the son of the previous guardian, Aegwin, the previous guardian, Medivh. The controlled Medivh opened the famous Dark Portal together with the orc warlock Gul'dan, Dan, and from then on, opened the prelude to the war in Azeroth. 30 years passed in the blink of an eye. We've seen the terrifying green tide formed by the demonized beastmen. We've resisted the undead's undead sea. We've defeated the Burning Legion's vice-commander's demonic army. We've destroyed the ancient gods and their followers who wanted to destroy the world. In the process, we united more and more kingdoms and different races. For the ultimate goal of destroying evil, we became brothers and sisters of different races. Here, I, Duke Marcus, am pleased to announce in my capacity as the commander of the Alliance that after 30 years, we are still standing tall in this world. Standing at the peak of all races. Duke's speech was transmitted to the ears of the people of the Alliance through countless magic loudspeakers and tens of thousands of magic mirrors. It was branded on their retinas. Oh, 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 oh. Countless fists were raised high into the sky. An endless number of weapons stood tall like a forest. Tens of thousands of cannons pointed at the sky. Be it the commoners or the soldiers, they all let out the loudest cheers from the surging pride in their hearts. Long live the Alliance. Long live Azeroth. Dooku allowed the people to shout loudly, venting the fanaticism in their hearts. After a full 3 minutes, when the exaggerated cheers died down, Duque continued his speech. Some people say that the Alliance's prosperity today is all thanks to me, the commander. My wives are the first to disagree, Duque joked. Queen Sylvie behind him raised her eyebrows cooperatively. The magic mirrors even gave Queen Sylvie a close-up. Many of the people below burst out in kind laughter. You must be joking. Perhaps the role of a leader is to control the general direction, but the reason why the Alliance has its prosperity today is because of the efforts of tens of millions of Alliance members and your tolerance. Without the gnomes' inventions and dwarves' forging, we might still be facing the 10-foot-tall demon guards with iron swords. Without elven magic, we would still be in the barren era of cold weapons. Without the Dreenei's holy light and holy water, we would still be fighting against evil with the most effective weapons. It is precisely because of the participation of various races that have the same goal of fighting against evil that the Alliance can prosper today. So, as long as they are not the minions of the Burning Legion, not the servants of the ancient gods, not driven by the evil gods, as long as an intelligent race requests to join the Alliance, we will give a friendly welcome. Here, let us welcome the new races that have joined the alliance: Pandaren, Tauren, Trolls, and the Forgotten. The addition of the new 4 races was just a ceremonial matter. The Alliance Throne Conference had already announced this news, and the people had already digested it. To be honest, when the Draenei, who looked the strangest, were accepted by the people of the Alliance, there were no races that could not be accepted. Of course, the most popular was the Pandaren. The Pandaren was a national treasure. No matter which world it was, as long as they stood there doing nothing, just their cute appearance could capture the hearts of countless people. The Pandaren were very funny. Although everyone knew that the leader was Xiaohao, they couldn't just pull out a ghost to represent them, right? Zhu Mistletoe insisted that he was the leader of a secret organization and was not suitable to appear in public. As a result, it was announced that the leader of the Pandaren was Chen Stormlicker. Old Chen was very annoyed, but this was personally appointed by Emperor Xiaohao. The Pandaren valued the teachings of their ancestors the most, so he had to be the leader. In the end, he became the leader, and his niece Lily became even more popular. The excited screams of the people could be heard everywhere, such as, "So cute! Can I hug you?" The people of the Alliance welcomed the Pandaren from the bottom of their hearts. As a race that the Alliance actively invited, the Pandaren naturally received the loudest cheers. When it came to the Tauren, the applause was not bad, but for the Trolls and the Forsaken. Except for the official friendly applause, there was no applause from the people. Of course, Duque couldn't ignore them. He publicly supported Darien and Darien, who had been promoted to the leader of the Forsaken. Yes, perhaps the Alliance once had a war with the Trolls and the Forsaken. But that's in the past. Even if you used to be hostile, as long as you are wholeheartedly integrated into the Alliance, the people of the Alliance will see your efforts and recognize you. Also, the Alliance is open. It is a righteous organization that fights against evil. We welcome all intelligent races that are willing to give their all to fight against evil to join us. Duque said this to clear the name of the Alliance. After all, he had been a little happy recently. Who knew that something would happen when he was showing off? A voice suddenly burst out from the crowd. Sao, the chief of the Orc Frostwolf clan, applied to join the Alliance on behalf of the clan. Huh. At this moment, Duque's expression was very interesting. Chapter 1989. Sal was a great figure that couldn't be avoided when the tribe was mentioned. Perhaps the elders of the old tribe owed the people of Azeroth a debt of blood, but ultimately, it had nothing to do with Sal. It wasn't even a debt of the sun. After all, the Frostwolf clan that Sal's father, Durotan, brought had been expelled by the old tribe controlled by Ghoul Dan after they came to Azeroth. After Durotan and his wife were killed, the Frostwolf clan hid in the mountains of Alterac and played hide-and-seek after the Dark Portal 1 and 2. They were considered to be completely neutral. In terms of the relationship between the Alliance and the tribe, Sal didn't start a war with the Alliance when he was the chief in this life. He didn't start a war with the Alliance even once when he was in power. Perhaps it was because the Alliance led by Duke was too domineering. In any case, there had never been a single war in history, big or small, with different degrees of friction and regular wars. It was because he acted as the Dove faction in the tribe that caused the dissatisfaction of the traditionalists and radicals, which forced Sal to step down if he didn't start a massacre. Strictly speaking, if Sal hadn't been soft-hearted and failed to abandon nearly 3 million traditionalist beastmen in Draenor, or ruthlessly suppressed the traditionalists, the tribe wouldn't have fallen into chaos. As long as the tribe wasn't in chaos, it was like a rope. No one would die if they touched it. At least, the Alliance couldn't do anything. Not only did they not have a righteous cause, they also had to face complete resistance. The traditionalist beastmen didn't have the blockhouses of the Frostwolf and Warsong clans. They were all masters of guerrilla warfare and tunnel warfare. Of course, the Alliance could use the Karakis and Oro's children to eliminate them, but they had to find the beastmen first. The Alliance didn't have good tools to investigate underground. Sound waves and elemental detectors weren't useful in the barren lands full of caves. How big was the Wailing Cave in the barren lands in the real world? It was more than 20 kilometers long and 5 kilometers wide. There were thousands of winding paths and caves inside. It would be no problem to squeeze 100,000 troops in. Not every place had a landscape like the Wailing Cave. Even if there weren't large caves, there were still many small caves. This was the biggest headache for the Alliance now. The Orthodox tribe had been wiped out, but the Frost Wolf tribe, one of the three main warring tribes, was nowhere to be found. Previously, Duque couldn't understand it, but now, all his questions seemed to have been answered. Following the sound, the tens of thousands of people in the venue saw a minotaur transforming. It was a perfect illusion. No one knew who had made it for thrall. Anyway, the luster on the body of a huge Tauren was changing colors and transforming. It was as magical as the ultimate transformation spell. A Tauren turned into a bare-chested former chief, thrall, wearing only a pair of leather pants, a pair of leather boots, and nothing in his hands. Beside Thrall was an old acquaintance, the legendary assassin, the female orc, Garona. No wonder. Duque sighed softly. The history of the world of Azeroth overlapped with each other. This wasn't the first time Duque had experienced this. Garona's appearance perfectly explained why Sar, who should have died in Orgrimmar's volcanic eruption, was here. If it was Garona, who had stabbed King Lang to death in the original history, then it wouldn't be surprising. What made Duque even more depressed was that Sar had perfectly defeated him. In the face of the Alliance's guards who rushed over, looking at the guards who had drawn their swords and the paladins who were glowing with holy golden light, Sar and Garona both spread their hands to show that they had no weapons and were not hostile. The words that Sar had just shouted in the common language had pushed the entire Alliance Throne Conference to the forefront. Of course, Duque could announce that Sar had been killed on the spot, but doing so would undoubtedly be slapping his own face. The Alliance had always regarded itself as a righteous organization that fought against evil. It was this thorough and unswerving policy, coupled with the corresponding strength that allowed them to get in touch with the Sleeping Dragon Temple and the Guardians, forming a further alliance. Genocide was not a simple matter. For the Alliance, which claimed to be righteous, it was only when Brainless Roar came to power that they had an absolute excuse to act. In order to destroy the Horde and prevent the revival of the Horde, Duque did not hesitate to absorb Taurens, trolls, and the Forsaken into the Alliance. Who would have thought that only a short time had passed? Sar was completely waiting for Duque to say these righteous words, and then he would take advantage of the situation and apply to join the Alliance in the name of an independent clan. Guards! Arrest these remnants of the Horde. William, who had a bad temper, could not hold it in. He stood up immediately and almost pulled out his artifact dual swords to fight himself. As a middle-aged man, William had matured a lot, but there were some things that could never be concealed. For example, his father, King Lang, had ultimately died in the hands of the Horde's assassins. His orders could not be said to be wrong. The Alliance destroyed the Orthodox Horde, which was led by the Orcs and supported by the Rusty Water Goblins and Magatha's Taurens. Strictly speaking, the Alliance and the remnants of the Orthodox Horde were still in a state of war. But it depended on the timing. Here, Duque had just said that all intelligent races were welcome to fight against evil, and here, William came to capture the unarmed Sar. Wasn't this a slap in the face to one's own people? Sar faced the sharp swords of the silver-hand paladins that were almost at his throat, ignoring Lena Thunderspear's warhammer that was hanging above his head, and took a step forward proudly and slowly. May I ask the Alliance commander, Sir Marcus? When I was the chief of the Horde, I had never fought with the Alliance. My Frostwolf clan and I had never raised our weapons against the Alliance's soldiers and people. Since the Trolls and the Forsaken had been at war with the Alliance, they could be accepted by the Alliance. Why did the Alliance arrest me? Was what you said just now a lie to confuse the people and whitewash justice? Sar's common language was abnormally standard, and every word was clear and penetrating. Almost every sentence was directed at what Duque had just said. It was a bit like a paradox. But it was a fact. It was obvious that Sar had seen through everything and was sure that the Alliance under the leadership of Duque would not make a move against him. What was even better was that in order to whitewash the Orcs and the Frostwolf clan, Sar had sold out his former allies, the Darkspear Trolls and the Forsaken. Woken rolled his eyes, Ben smiled bitterly, and Delano, who was standing next to him as the deputy leader of the Forsaken, also scratched his head. In order to destroy the Horde, the Alliance could be said to have painstakingly planned for how long Duque had been plotting. Of course, the Alliance would not be so stupid as to dismember the Horde here and let the Horde come to the Alliance and become parasites, sucking the Alliance's blood to grow again. Sar's betrayal of his former teammates was more like a heart-to-heart, to show that he had no ambition. Chapter 1990. So many leaders of the Alliance wanted to wipe out the Beast Men even in their dreams. Now, Thrall actually jumped out and said that he wanted the Frost Wolves to join the Alliance. This situation was extremely delicate and awkward. Even if Thrall took a step back and allowed the Frost Wolves to join the Alliance, would the Frost Wolves have a good time? William was about to explode with rage. Duque was still the experienced one. He pressed one hand on William's shoulder. Deputy Commander William's orders are not wrong. After all, when the tribe declared war on the Alliance, the Frostwolf clan was still a part of the Orthodox tribe. From the day of the declaration of war, the Alliance did not have any diplomatic contact with the Frostwolf clan. Thrall suddenly realized his mistake. The Frostwolf clan and the Blackrock clan have already raised the flag of crusade against the evil chief, Garush, who defected to Yashiji. Duque insisted. That was an internal rebellion of the tribe. At most, it was considered an uprising. At that time, your slogans did not announce the independence of these two clans from the tribe. So, until now, the Alliance has defined your Excellency's Frostwolf clan as the remnants of the tribe. This is not wrong. William's expression softened. Everyone could see that Duque had calmly turned the tables. Thrall raised his head. Then, may I ask, Your Excellency, are you going to arrest us as the remnants of the tribe? Just as Duque was about to speak, a certain dragon king with the appearance of a night elf laughed in the VIP seats. Nozdormu sent a message to Duque using a special telepathic message. Yo, Duque. My duty has already ended. Even after the cataclysm, the future that I saw for a long time became blank. I originally thought that it was because this world was writing a new history. But do you know? Know what? Duke replied snappily through his telepathy. I just saw an image from another timeline. That was the direction of another history. Very interesting. Garush Hellscream was not killed. With the help of one of my traders, he went to another timeline and created the Iron Tribe, in an attempt to counterattack the main timeline. Then, he was destroyed by the Alliance and the tribe in this world. More than 10 years passed on the other side. Durotan didn't die, but he didn't give birth to a son. Instead, he gave birth to a daughter named Gyara. Pfft. Duque snorted. What the hell, Sal had actually turned into a woman? Turned into a female orc? And there's no little hook? Would such a ridiculous thing really happen? Nozdormu's laughter could be heard. We can't be sure about other timelines. Perhaps the future would change again. Who knows? The future represented limitless possibilities. You're a demigod of the weave, the strongest hero of Azeroth. Why would you be afraid of a little orc hero without any power? Yes. I, Duque, am not afraid of him. Could it be that Sal could flip over the 5-finger mountain of the Buddha? Once he entered the Alliance, he would be as deep as the ocean. Once he entered, Sal could forget about causing trouble. On the surface, Duque looked very pretentious and fair. Remnants of the tribe? If you choose to fight to the end, then my answer is yes. The Alliance wasn't afraid of war or guerrilla warfare. Of course, if the Frostwolf clan chooses to join the Alliance, then I will announce in the name of the Alliance commander that the Throne Conference will review and vote on the Frostwolf clan's application. Duque turned his head. Men, invite the 2 distinguished guests of the Frostwolf clan to the state guest house in Lordaeron. Treat them like the leader of a clan. With Duque's words, the guards could only put away their weapons. Lena Thunderspear made an inviting gesture. Sal sighed secretly. He was forcing Duque, but he was actually afraid. Not to mention that he was no longer the chief of the tribe. Even if he was still the chief, he had lost the position to talk to Duque on equal terms. This kind of risk could only be used once. Presumably, the alliance would strengthen security in the future and amend various regulations, such as refusing to accept the alliance of the city or using the opportunity to threaten to block the last possibility of the enemy causing trouble. But this time, the Frostwolf clan had passed, right? The farce came to an end, but with Sal's interruption, the atmosphere of victory was immediately diluted. But the ceremony still had to continue. Duque revealed a slightly awkward but polite smile. Think about it, everyone. Even the former chief of the tribe led his clan to join the alliance. Doesn't this prove the justice of the alliance against the tribe? With the support and hard work of everyone in the alliance, we finally won this sacred war. We should be happy. Shouldn't we? Yes. Absolutely right. The expressions of the alliance leader and the people were much better. Let me think, in this case, wouldn't I be Sal's senior? The gnome was a funny one. Master Craftsman Jurban's seemingly funny words immediately made everyone feel better. What was pretentious? This was pretentious. In the past, the chief of the tribe had not been a slave of the conquered. Instead, he had taken the initiative and pitifully came to be the alliance's shoe-carrying lackey. This kind of feeling was simply wonderful. For a moment, the atmosphere was lively again. It was not easy to turn the situation around. Of course, it was time to continue celebrating. Duque waved his hand, and Vashj, who had appeared in the form of a Naga, came over. Back then, the Storm Nagas joined the alliance as a third-tier vassal race. Now, I am honored to announce that the Storm Nagas have been promoted to the second tier. There were many Naga clans, but the Nagas were considered one of the elders of the alliance. After all, the earliest Rage-Scale Naga had joined Duque before the war. Ordinary people could not tell the difference between the Rage-Scale Nagas and the Storm Nagas. Anyway, they were all under Vashj's control now. The promotion of the Storm Naga, who had once been under Illidan's command, was even more meaningful. The triumphant ceremony finally came to an end amidst the cheers and laughter. This day was destined to belong to the alliance. The tribe had become a thing of the past. The alliance's reception after the banquet was also a good time for discussion. In a secret room that was specially used for discussion, the main leaders of the alliance gathered together. William was the first to speak. He was still a little unwilling. Are we going to let the orcs off just like that? Muradin was the most experienced. He patted William's shoulder. Without the tribe, the orcs will no longer be a problem. You are not just a king now. Jaina gently turned the cup of black tea in her hand. How many people can a Frostwolf clan have? Less than 50,000. Moreover, we cannot give the Frostwolves the first-tier status. In the future, we will use war to control the population of the Frostwolves. As long as they enter the Alliance's system, we have 10,000 ways to restrict or even kill the orcs. After this speech, the leaders immediately had no objections. Chapter 1991. Jaina's words were a little dark. Perhaps it was different from the Alliance's mainstream policy of multiracial harmony. As a countermeasure, it could be considered a form of insurance. Hoof had a different opinion. Delaney still can't trust the orcs. How many times had this happened? The first time was the evil demon blood, the second time was the power of Yashiji. Is there a third time? Lord Imriel, if you're really that worried, I think we can let the orcs learn the way of the holy light, Theon suggested. At this moment, Duque, who was the commander of the alliance, laughed. What a brilliant idea. I think it's not bad. Let's do that. And I think we can add something. For example? Tyrant and the others were curious. At the end of the day, it's the traditional orcs' backward lifestyle of hunting that triggered the tribal unrest and deepened the inclination towards war. That kind of mindless method of snatching hunting grounds when there was no prey was too backward. So we returned a portion of the barren lands to the Frostwolf clan. Then, he taught them farming techniques. I can personally assist the Cenarian Circle to further transform the land in the barren lands. This is good. Malfurion was most delighted to see that. Whoever was using the land, it was always a good thing that the scars on the land could be repaired. Then, force Thrall and every orc in his Frostwolf clan to learn the common language within a certain period of time. If they fail to complete the task within the time limit, they will be punished with non-violence. I haven't thought of the details yet. Poor communication is one of the root causes of conflict. If we can understand each other better, it will reduce a lot of unnecessary friction. Finally, there's the way of life in a fixed settlement. With farming as the foundation, the lifestyle had to change accordingly. I think the Alliance can do a lot. In a sense, what Duque was doing was more like colonization. When a country or a people was colonized for a long time, many lifestyles and ways of thinking would be subtly changed under the washing of time. It was just like how Hindustan had been ruled by the empire where the sun never sets for more than 100 years. Even today, traces of it could still be seen in every aspect. There were countless connections between them, and there was no end to it. Since Sal chose to join the Alliance as his last resort, he couldn't blame the Alliance for assimilating the Beast Men. After reaching a preliminary consensus in the Throne Conference, Duque summoned Thrall. The change in their status caused the two of them to no longer be on equal footing as before. Duque did not deliberately humiliate Sal. Firstly, there was no need to do so. Secondly, that would be too petty. The victor had already been decided and they were no longer enemies, so there was no need for him to do such a shameful thing. Duque was entertaining Sal in the Lordaeron Palace. As the husband of Queen Kalia, he owned a small palace that covered an area of 1,000 square meters in the palace. Originally, he didn't want to be so troublesome, but the 4 queen wives insisted on building a palace for Duque. This made Duque even more certain of his title as the uncrowned emperor. Of course, having an elemental demigod as a husband was also a kind of social climb for a queen of the mortal world. The nobles of every country were proud of it. When he arrived at the palace of Rotterdam City, Sal was filled with emotions. Led by the thief hero, Vanessa, they walked into the living room. Queen Kalia came out to say hello and left. In the resplendent living room, only Duque, Sal, and the maids Vanessa and Vashti were left. Duque was very considerate and prepared a large pot of Rotterdam's ale for Sal, which was a specialty of Rotterdam. Picking up the large wine glass specially prepared for the orcs, Sal took a big gulp without hesitation. Duque noticed that Sal used his big green finger to pick up a napkin on the plate and wiped his mouth. It tastes good. Come to think of it, I haven't tasted this in almost 15 years. 15 years? Well, I was still a slave gladiator. Occasionally, I would be rewarded with some ale by my master, because of my outstanding performance. Although I hated that part of my life, I still liked ale. Oh. Do you think the Frostwolf clan is here to be slaves this time? A playful smile appeared on Duque's face. Unexpectedly, Sal curled his lips. When I was young, I felt that being a slave was the most disgusting. When I grew up and became a chief for a long time, after the situation between the Alliance and the Horde changed, I realized that there was something more terrible than being a slave in the world, the destruction of the entire race. Duque was silent. It was not that he could not continue the conversation, but he wanted to see Sal's resolve. Sal stared at Duque. The Horde lost, and the orcs also lost. I came with the resolve of a loser. Even if the Alliance once again treats the orcs as slaves, I and the Frostwolf clan will accept it. What are you asking for? Very simple, the reproduction of the orc race. The orcs are a great and brave race. They have made many mistakes and gone through many detours. I do not think the orcs should be destroyed. At the same time, I think the orcs will be a very good supplement for the Alliance. The alliance will always need professional warriors. Duque was really unpredictable. Sal could only continue to act like a salesman and persuade Duque to accept the Orcs' alliance under the premise that the throne conference had not reached a conclusion. In terms of this, the alliance has many substitutes. For example, the burly Tauren and Drenii. If we need agility, we also have werewolves. They are too few in number. They can be used as an elite assault force, but not as a conventional, expendable vanguard warrior. According to Sal, if he did not have a typical orc appearance, no one could imagine that he was an absolute orc. This was simply betraying his compatriots. Duque was surprised. For a moment, Duque almost thought that Sal was up to something. This kind of shameless bootlicking, was he really Sal? But in the next second, Duque found that Sal was still the same Sal. He was smart, rational, and not lacking in courage. If the alliance was led by someone else, then I would probably be like this, groveling in order to seek the survival and reproduction of the orcs. Then I would quietly wait for an opportunity. When the alliance is weak or careless, then I would destroy the alliance from the inside. At the very least, I would free the orcs from the alliance's slavery. Then, what if I am the leader of the alliance? Duque leaned back safely, letting his back rest on the sofa. He crossed his legs and interlaced his fingers on his thighs. Sal, on the other hand, shrugged and said, "No way. I am 30 years old this year. If it were any other alliance leader, I might be able to endure it and see if I could wait until the leader of the alliance grew old or died accidentally. But in the face of a demigod of Azeroth who was immortal and could not even be destroyed, and such a wise and great leader, I can only accept my fate." Chapter 1992. Pfft. Duque laughed. He knew that Sal was sucking up to him, but it felt good. He was Sal, the greatest leader of the tribe, second to none. In history, even the successors Wajin and Queen Shay were not as wise and courageous as Sal. If a normal member of the alliance tried to suck up to Duke would only treat them as a bystander who was cheering 666. If it were Sal, this wave of flattery would have been quite effective. "Sal, there are very few people who can make me blush or feel embarrassed. In recent years, you are the first." "Oh, then it's my honor." Sal bowed. "Have you and the Frostwolf really accepted your fate?" Duque stopped smiling and became serious. "Yes, in fact. There are still many Blackrock and Warsong beast men who survived. I'm just a pathfinder." Sal was straightforward. This was clearly saying that if the alliance could not even accept the Frostwolf tribe, which had the cleanest background, then the remaining beast men could only resist to the end in despair. Duque did not care. He stood up, took a few steps, and looked out the window. "Did you know, Sal? Since the moment the tribe set foot on the land of Azeroth, I have been planning the destruction of the tribe. For 30 years, I have never stopped thinking about this. After you became the leader of the tribe, I also tried to see if the two huge organizations could coexist on this vast planet. After all, the Burning Legion and the evil forces of the ancient gods brought too much pressure to the alliance." Sal was a little sad. "Sorry, the tribe did not seize this opportunity." "That's right. If the tribe had taken advantage of the situation to rise, perhaps until today, once there are no external enemies, the alliance and the tribe will immediately start attacking each other. After all, in the bones of the tribe, they still advocate using force to solve everything. Fortunately, the alliance is strong now, and the tribe self-destructed in the hands of Gurus. Perhaps, this is fate." Sal also sighed. "Okay, let's not talk anymore. The return of the Burning Legion is a destined future. In a few years, we will see more signs." "You are right. Now that it is Azeroth, we need any powerful intelligent race to participate in the war against evil. There would come a time when the Alliance would make use of the orcs. However, I must remind you, since the orcs have joined the Alliance, don't let the traditionalists raise their heads. Otherwise. Duque gently raised his hand, and the white jade sculpture on his left suddenly turned into a beast man. A second later, it was instantly erased. There was no wreckage or even dust. Just like that, he silently disappeared from this world. This meant that if the beast men had any more thoughts of rebellion, he wouldn't mind erasing all the beast men from the universe. This was no longer a warning, it was a death line he had drawn for Sal. Who touched it? Who would destroy them? Sal felt a chill in his heart. Understood. Once upon a time, I softened and let the traditionalists take control. In this generation, even if we have to pay the price of blood, we can't let them hinder the beastmen's reproduction. Now that the negotiation was done, all that was left was to go through the motions. On the 5th of January, the 30th year of the Dark Portal, the Alliance officially announced that the Frostwolf tribe had joined the Alliance as a second-class tribe. At the same time, the Beastmen, Taurens, and Trolls removed the obvious tribal title of Chieftain and changed it to Leader. On the 10th of January, the remaining Blackrock tribe and Warsong tribe joined the Alliance and were classified as third-class vassal tribes. The leader of the Blackrock tribe was Varrock Salufar. As for the Warsong tribe, the leader of the Warsong tribe roared for Grom Hell. Yes, Grom, who had always been in pain and chose not to help either side, finally chose to return to his tribe in the state of a heroic spirit. Considering that Master Roar had been with him for so many years, Duque allowed it. Other than using the magic power of the weave as a source of power to support his body, Grom had nothing to do with Duque. This could be considered parting on good terms. Grom would temporarily take over the position of leader as a heroic spirit until he nurtured a disciple who could inherit his mantle. At this point, the time node of the Mystery of Pandaria had come to an end. Because of the complete death of Braindead Roar and the elimination of a traitor in Nozdormu's family, there would no longer be the King of Draenor. Azeroth entered a rare period of peace. The Alliance announced the implementation of the 5-year plan, which focused on climbing the technology tree. The core of the plan was to combine the various black technologies left behind by the Titans and Draenei and reverse engineer them to create all kinds of combat weapons. At the same time, some demons who had been captured by the Alliance or the former tribes became experimental subjects. Time flew, and 35 years had passed since the Dark Portal. When the Alliance announced that the first 5-year plan had been completed, the second 5-year plan had begun. On this day, a prison that seemed to have been forgotten by the world welcomed a special guest. The commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus. As the Warden May of Shadowsong, who had extremely high authority and was a legendary hero, she could ignore almost any leader of the Alliance. Duque was definitely the exception. It was not only because of Duque's strength and authority, but also because of Duque's achievements. Even if she only left the prison once a year to attend the secret meeting of the Alliance's higher-ups, she could feel the changes that the Alliance and even Darnassus had undergone under Duque's transformation. It was more beautiful, full of life, energy, and security. Maiev bowed to welcome Duque and led Duque to the deepest part of the dungeon. It was dark and airless, but it was unexpectedly clean. This was obviously the result of meticulous work day after day. It could be seen that Maiev did not mistreat the prisoners here. Kaboom! With a loud noise, the round stone door, which weighed more than 100 tons, was pushed open by the nature magic array, revealing a spiral staircase leading downwards. Duke floated in the air with the support of the water elements, and slowly descended 100 meters. When Maiev opened the last cell door, Duque saw a blue-skinned half-demon kneeling in the middle of the cell. Oh, what a rare guest. It's you. Faced with Illidan's question, Duque was very calm. It's me. How is Tyrande? Illidan raised his head slightly, a flame flickering in his eyes that were covered by a black cloth. She's busy taking care of the child. Duque's mouth twitched as he casually said something that was actually provoking Illidan. The veins on Illidan's temples bulged, but he quickly became discouraged. Oh, the year before last, she told me that she wanted your child. She didn't come last year. Illidan tried to suppress his emotions. Damn it, Maiev didn't tell me anything. Duque sighed in his heart. No matter how many years had passed, Illidan's heart was still with Tyrande. Unfortunately, Tyrande was not fated to be with him, whether it was in his previous life or this one. She's a very beautiful girl. Tyrande said that if you weren't a degenerate, she would be willing to let the child recognize you as the father. Chapter 1993. Illidan suddenly stood up, and the holy light shackles on his body clanked. Maiev immediately tightened her grip on her weapon. Duque was extremely calm. Duke Marcus, are you using me? Illidan clenched his fists. Use? Duque shrugged. If you think I'm using you, then so be it. But remember, I'm not using anyone to threaten you. Tyrande is already my woman, and I won't use my woman and child as a bargaining chip against her admirer. I'm just making a proposal that will make you and Tyrande happy. I'm against this decision. Illidan suddenly loosened his fists and sat down again. What do you want me to do? I know that when we attacked the Black Temple, your most elite demon hunters weren't there. I'm guessing that they went to the Burning Legion. Illidan became agitated again. You don't know anything. Don't know? Duque raised his hand and revealed a purplish-blue energy ball. The image inside was of Illidan's order for his subordinates to go to the Burning Legion's planet of origin, Martin, to carry out a suicide mission, to seize Sardra's keystone. It was a divine artifact that could open a portal to any army planet. Not only Illidan, but even Maiev beside him gasped. Even though Duque had told Maiev earlier, Illidan was probably not that simple. When they saw the evidence of Illidan secretly stabbing the Burning Legion, they still felt extremely shocked. Illidan, ever since the War of the Ancients, you've realized the strength of the Burning Legion. You thought that there was no way out by directly confronting the Legion. So you chose the path that your compatriots don't understand, and it's also the most difficult path. Even if you have to bear the stigma of a traitor, you still joined the Burning Legion to find the Legion's weakness and then destroy it in one fell swoop. Am I right? Duque's voice was not loud, but it was like a giant hammer hitting Illidan and Maev's hearts, making them feel like their hearts were about to collapse in the next moment. Maiev was shocked. Illidan's mouth twitched, and he couldn't speak for a long time. Let me tell you one more thing. The detection circle I left in Draenor is reacting. A void battleship of the Burning Legion infiltrated the galaxy where Delano was. Guess who's on the boat? Duque looked like he had Illidan in the bag. Illidan remained silent. They should be the key to the counterattack in your eyes. Duque's words shattered Illidan's last shred of hope. For the first time, Illidan looked at Duque with fear and awe. Illidan was blind. But in his empty eye sockets, the soul waves emitted by the soul fire that replaced the function of his eyes meant this. Even Maiev could sense it. She held Illidan captive for 10,000 years, then 10. She had never seen her unruly compatriot show such a weak expression. There's no point in hiding it. To a powerful existence that has experienced countless time branches, your past is no secret to me. If you wish, I can even announce it to the public right away. That way, you can once again become the hero of Caldorii. A good brother in the eyes of your elder brother. Obtain Tyrande's forgiveness. There was no way to resist. Duque had perfectly grasped Illidan's weakness. Illidan was discouraged. It's not time to make this public yet. But I will do as you say. That's right. On that mysterious spaceship were the Illidan demon hunters sent by Illidan. Just like in history, they had miraculously completed their mission. In history, they had survived and returned to the Black Temple. But as soon as they returned, they found that the Black Temple had been breached and Illidan had died at the hands of Maiev the Watcher. These demon hunters were captured by Maiev and imprisoned in the prison on the Broken Isles. They had been locked up in a state of stasis for 5 years. But in this life, probably because of Duque's actions, they were caught in a space-time turbulence, or to escape the pursuit of the Burning Legion. They actually delayed until the 36th year of the Dark Portal before returning. But it didn't matter. Illidan was not dead anyway. It was too easy to control these powerful demon hunters. It's okay. I don't think that announcing everything will benefit the war with the Burning Legion. The war hasn't started yet. Announcing it now will only alarm the enemy. How about this? I will have your elder brother and tyrant come to see you. Duque patted Illidan's shoulder. This time, Duque had him in the bag. Illidan asked, then, what about the keystone? Duque rolled his eyes at him. We can't just use this small number of people to sneak in while the Burning Legion is still at home. That would be a suicide mission. Let's wait for the right time. According to my judgment, there will be results in a year. Can you wait? Humph. Illidan snorted disdainfully. I can even wait for 10,000 years, let alone a year. After saying that, the One-Egg Lord glanced at Maiev with even more disdain. Lock me up. I will be your prisoner for another year. Maiev was embarrassed. She had hated the One-Egg Lord for 10,000 years. In the past 10,000 years, she had used many methods to torture him. Now, she was suddenly told that she had hated the wrong person for the past 10,000 years. The feeling of loss was killing her. Seeing Maiev's disappointed and guilty expression, Duque couldn't help but wonder if Maiev had turned from a sadist to a masochist because of her guilt. Duque left. In the 35 years of the Dark Portal, there was only one major event that happened publicly, the return of the former king of Iron Forge, Magni Bronzebeard. On the 1st of June, Bulang Bronzebeard ran into the Alliance headquarters in Lordaeron. As one of the two main headquarters of the Alliance, Duque often worked here. The headquarters used to be in Stormwind City. Later, because most of Duque's wives were in Lordaeron, they moved the Alliance headquarters to Lordaeron in 32 years of the Dark Portal with reasons like, there are more kingdoms in Lordaeron and, the two commanders of the Alliance don't stay in the same place. Bulang walked quickly with his short legs and shouted loudly, my brother came back to life. After shouting incoherently for a while, he felt that it was inappropriate, so he added a few more words, my brother, who had become a crystal fossil, suddenly came back to life. Duque. Brother Magni wants you to go find him immediately. Oh. This is really a sign. There were two obvious signs of the Legion's return. One was the return of the demon hunters, and the other was the return of Magni after becoming a demigod. Both of them, sure enough, when Duque and a group of Alliance leaders put down their work and rushed to Iron Forge, they saw the Crystal Dwarf King. The first thing he said was, the Burning Legion is coming. Chapter 1994. Magni Bronzebeard, the previous king of the Bronzebeard tribe of Steel Stove Castle. In order to pursue the path of a demigod, he had turned into a diamond man after settling all his affairs. Coming out of the portal of Steel Stove Castle's secret spell zone, the leaders of the various countries realized that they had bumped into each other, so they decided to go together. They had been to Steel Stove Castle countless times, and the biggest difference was the elated dwarves. Everywhere they went, they could see dwarves holding large beer bottles and drinking to their heart's content. They could hear them shouting, "Long live King Magni." Secondly, under Bulang's lead, they saw the reopening of the King's Hall that had been sealed for almost a decade. After Magni turned into a diamond man, in order to show that he had no intention of inheriting the throne, Muradin, who had taken over as acting king, moved his office away from the King's Hall. He only asked for a side hall beside the King's Hall, and even his desk had a sign that read, Steel Stove Castle Regent, written in fist-sized letters. Today, the King's Hall was reopened. From afar, everyone could see 3 layers of dwarven guards surrounding the secret chamber. But as they got closer, they heard a scream that sounded like a pig being slaughtered. Bastard! If you touch me again, I'll kill you. Oh, this was a familiar and intimidating voice that Magni was extremely familiar with. Why are the dwarven guards in the secret chamber snickering? Just a little. Just a little. That was the voice of the dwarf craftsman, Jurban. Scram. A dwarf's beard is not to be violated. Put down that electric drill, and I'll admit that we're good friends. No, no, no. Can't you sacrifice a little for your old friend? No. Scram. There was another roar. With Bulang leading the way, everyone immediately saw Muradin, who was smiling bitterly, and the two dwarves in the middle of the hall, who looked like they were about to commit rape. An impact drill in his left hand and an electric saw in his right. If not for the fact that Jerbin, who was less than a meter tall, was too short, he would have looked like a chainsaw murderer. On the other side, the diamond man, who was dodging left and right, was naturally Magni. He had snatched a guard's shield and was pathetically blocking the dwarf craftsman's electric saw. Jerbin, that's enough. Duque chuckled as he stopped the bewitched Jerbin. At his cry, Jerbin paused regretfully, and switched off the saw. After so many years of cooperation, Duque's prestige was unparalleled. Sensing Magni's aura, Duque smiled. Congratulations, demigod Magni. Yes, thank you. I will be happier if there are no old friends with chainsaws trying to cut off my beard after I return. Jerbin rolled his eyes and muttered in a shrill voice, just a little, don't be so stingy. Bullshit. The last time you said you wanted some dinosaur specimens, you cut off the thigh of a Tyrannosaurus rex. Magni exposed Jerbin on the spot. It was Duque who stopped the shortest dwarf. If you can't cut his beard, you can ask him for his clothes or his nails. Good idea. The craftsman immediately pulled on the motor rope of the chainsaw, and the chainsaw roared again. Enough. Enough, Duque felt a headache coming on. Let's talk business first. The leaders of the alliance gathered together. After everyone sat down, Magni stroked his stiff diamond beard. Yes, first of all, I have to thank Duque for helping me make the arrangements. I am very happy that Steel Stove Castle did not fall into chaos. That's what I should do. After I went through the ascension ritual, the power of the earth changed my body permanently. This made my body beyond the realm of flesh, and more like a part of the earth. I am different from Duque and the rest. I no longer have the biological structure of a human. Magni turned his head. Muradin, you have done well these days. From now on, you will be the king of Steel Stove Castle. Ah! Muradin cried out in shock. We dwarves are not long-lived beings that can live for tens of thousands of years. It is normal for the throne to change. Moreover, I look more like a statue than a dwarf. I am different from the two next door who look like humans but can still pretend to be mortals. Magni did not hold back as he ridiculed Duque and Queen Sylvanas. Duque was a little embarrassed, while Queen Sylvanas giggled. It is decided. Magni changed the topic. I also heard the voice of Azeroth's will. She told me to bring a message to Duque and everyone. The Burning Legion is really coming again. Because Duque has led the Alliance to deal heavy losses to the Legion many times, the Legion's return will be later than expected. It will only come in about a year. Oh. Holy light. They really came. I almost thought they weren't coming. The leaders discussed among themselves. In the Alliance, Duque was known as the Prophet. He had predicted 25 years before the Dark Portal that the Legion would come in about 10 years. But the 10 years had passed, and there was no sign of the demon army. Everyone could not help but mutter to themselves. In fact, there were already voices in the Alliance that it was not beneficial to economic development to blindly carry out war preparations. Should more resources be mobilized to more convenient places? To be prepared for war, all important facilities had to be built deep in the mountains or underground. How could it be more convenient to dig a hole underground than to build on a plain? This was what Duque did not expect. After losing the tribe as an external enemy, the Alliance was showing signs of slacking off. Magni's appearance had undoubtedly provided sufficient evidence to support Duque's prophecy. Magni's reputation among the dwarves was unparalleled. If the dwarves were to work at full force, then the Alliance's war preparations would be at least half done. All right. I have more things to show everyone. Come, everyone. Duque, open a portal to Otter. Unlike in history, the Alliance was now on good terms with the Guardians of Order. Seeing Duque and the rest arrive, the first to come out to welcome them was Mimiron, followed by Torim. When they knew the destination of Magni and the rest, it was Mimiron who brought everyone to Otter's observatory. When they fought Otter back then, they knew that the observatory needed a key to open, and no one in this world seemed to know where the key was. There's not even a keyhole on the gate. How do we get in? Muradin asked. At this moment, Magni told everyone, "Idiot, I'm that key dash." Then, Mimiron, whose brain circuit was different from others, summoned a huge robot that grabbed Magni and slammed him against the gate. "Idiot. Let go of me. I'll be near the gate." The Diamond Dwarf shouted as he struggled. After Mimiron's robot put Magni down, Magni chanted a passage in the Earth elemental language that outsiders could not understand. Instantly, the huge disc above the gate moved. Chapter 1995. For tadpole-like runes that looked like yin and yang fish emitted different lights, red gears, yellow lightning, green leaves, and a white blood flower that was exactly the same as the light on Magni's body. As the light bloomed, the mechanism of the door started to activate. It was very metaphysical. Duque muttered, "I wonder if the encryption method requires our quantum satellite?" Everyone followed the Diamond Saint Magni in and immediately saw his old friend Orgarin. Although Duque could clearly see the label on his retina that this was not his real body but his echo, there was not much difference. This was Orgaron's will projected from an unknown corner of the universe. "It's you guys again." Orgarin himself was a human figure that seemed to be formed from constellation lines and starlight. His expression was a little hazy, but it did not prevent everyone from seeing his expression as if he had just eaten a mouthful of hot shit. How could he be happy? Back then, it was this group of mortals who surrounded him and gave him a good beating. Only then did he send out a signal that this world was good, and he didn't need to reset it. Who would have thought that the Azeroth star soul was also requested by the Titan who hadn't fully matured yet, and it was this group of little bastards. It would be strange if he was not angry. He was about to explode and lecture them. Duque spread his hands. "Yo, Orgarin, it's been a long time." "Oh, you're in Orion Alpha? Do you want me to open a portal to visit you now?" "It's very convenient." If Orgarin had a tongue, he would have bitten his own tongue. It was not easy for him to escape from this group of gods of plagues. Who knew that these gods of plagues were now so strong that no one could control them? With just one sense, he knew that Duque and the others had become stronger. Alright, he could not beat Duque and the others back then, and he could not beat them now. This was the tragedy of the Titan's creation. Basically, the upper limit of his strength was locked. Then, he immediately realized something was wrong. He looked up in shock. When he spread his senses beyond the Azeroth atmosphere, he saw the third and fourth moon and a series of neatly arranged satellites hovering in the orbit of planet Azeroth. Orgaron was terrified. Although he looked serious and majestic on the surface, he was actually afraid and said, "Ahem, you have your mission, and I have my duty. Let's get down to business." After exchanging some pleasantries, Orgarin opened his mouth and said, "It's because of you cheaters, shameless bastards that we weren't able to come this far. Otherwise, why would our boss Titan not be able to live to this day after creating so many things? Oh. You must be joking." The above was purely Duze's own translation. Orgarin's original words were a very official version of the story. Sigh. I really didn't expect you to develop to such an extent. Perhaps this is your flaw. Back then, the Titans gave you free will, allowing you to surpass the laws of the universe and survive. Normally, under the siege of the Burning Legion and the ancient gods, the calculated probability of your survival is infinitely close to zero. In the face of such a powerful enemy, even the most powerful of Titan's creations could not escape. Yet, you were able to survive and develop such a magnificent civilization. With such an alliance, we can tell you this planet and the ultimate secret of the Pantheon without any worries. This was the main point. Do you know why the Burning Legion attacked Azeroth? That's because the key to destroying the Burning Legion is in Azeroth, the Pillar of Creation. The Pillar of Creation? The mortal heroes were all dumbfounded. The name itself sounded like a high-end, grand, and high-class item. The Pillar of Creation is actually just a name. It is the divine weapon that the Titans used to create the world, and it is the key to fighting against the Burning Legion. These divine weapons are called the Pillars of Creation in Azeroth, and they have been obtained by people a long time ago. At this point, Olgaron looked at Duque. Duke Marcus, you should be familiar with these things, right? I can sense the aura of one of the Pillar of Creation on you. Duque acted out what it meant to be dazed for a moment, then as if he had just woken up from a dream, he lost it. Wait. Are you talking about the Tear of Elun? Duque raised his hand, and a diamond-shaped red crystal-like object appeared in his right palm. It emitted a gentle wave of divine power. Everyone's jaw dropped. In Duque's harem chat group, there was an uproar. Wait, wasn't this kept by Isra all this time? When did you get it? Tyrant cried out on the spot. Ever since the cataclysm, I asked Isra to come. Elun didn't object either. With this, I have a deeper understanding of the power of the gods. Duque pretended to be casual. No wonder you used such a short time to train from the demigod level to the peak of demigod level. Queen Sylvie suddenly realized. No, you're thinking too much. Ah. It's so cool to be the first mortal to become a demigod, to be able to occupy the most powerful divine weapon in Azeroth. Jaina was a little envious. No, I'm just occupying the most powerful harem in Azeroth. On the other side, Orgarin continued his explanation. There are 4 other pillars of creation level divine weapons. They are Shield of Agrama, Tidal Stone, Hammer of Kaz, Garoth, and Eye of Amon, Thul. I'm not sure of their exact location, but I can tell you that I'm 100% sure that they are in Azeroth. Go. Heroes of the mortal world, do your best to resist the Burning Legion. When you gather all 5 pillars, you will be able to launch a counterattack. Don't be afraid, and don't be discouraged. The Guardians of Azeroth will cooperate fully with you. I have already received a weak summon from the Pantheon. The signal is too weak, and I can't be sure. Perhaps, on the day of the final battle, you will receive help from the Pantheon. Do your best. Mortals, according to your calculation method, you still have 360 days. After saying that, Orgaron's figure slowly faded into the void and disappeared without a trace. Just as all the big shots of the Alliance were still in shock, Duque let out a long sigh of relief. It was finally done. This was the last piece of the puzzle against the Burning Legion. That's right. The arrival of the Legion at this time was also the most glorious moment of the entire Azeroth. Capable people were everywhere, and heroes were everywhere. When Odin, the boss of Odor, and the lords of the Pantheon arrived, this great era would officially begin. Chapter 1996. This was an era where divine weapons could be found everywhere. To put it in an exaggerated way, killing a pig in the enemy's lair in a random game could yield a divine weapon. Of course, that was just for show. To truly unleash the power of a divine weapon, it had to be recharged. A divine weapon that had not been recharged and had the power of the engravings was just a pile of scrap metal. At most, it looked better. Well. But to a salted fish, even a useless divine weapon was still a divine weapon. He could brag about it for the rest of his life and pass it down to his descendants as a family heirloom. Your grandfather. Back then, there were a bunch of divine weapons. Look, the door panel of our house was made of the divine weapon tower shield. Divine weapons were the ultimate glory of an era, and also the greatest symbol of an era. Some might say that if divine weapons were common, would they still be divine weapons? Duque wanted to say, yes. Even if they were common, a divine weapon was still a divine weapon. Without these divine weapons, the mortals of Azeroth would not have the power to fight against hundreds of millions of demons, especially the elite demons. For normal demons, Duque relied on the technology tree in the Alliance to use all kinds of mass-produced black technology to make up for this disadvantage. But in the world of Azeroth, high-level mysteries would always crush low-level mysteries. Without enough energy, ordinary attacks would be useless against high-ranking demons. This was truly unscathed. Even the mandatory 1 HP reduction in the game didn't happen. Perhaps after this ultimate battle, most of the divine weapons that were temporarily created would lose their power and become ordinary metal. It was because of these timely divine weapons that the mortals had the possibility of defeating the terrifying Burning Legion. Orgaren was gone, and the war that involved the entire world of Azeroth was just about to begin. Witnessing and hearing the news of the Legion's return made the leaders of the various countries extremely nervous. After returning, there were no surprises. The throne conference passed the war mobilization motion. Sally's voice sounded in every communication channel in the Alliance again. Emergency broadcast. Emergency broadcast. Just 15 minutes ago, the leaders of the Alliance received accurate news from the Pantheon. The Burning Legion will descend on Azeroth in 360 days. The throne conference has passed an emergency motion. The entire Alliance will immediately enter a state of Level 1 combat readiness. From now on, the Alliance will prohibit the sale of food, wine, and alcoholic beverages. The military factory will immediately adjust the production plan. Within 3 days, 3 shifts will be in operation 24 hours a day. The final battle had finally arrived. Everyone knew enough about the return of the army. It could even be said that the Alliance had been waiting for this day for too long. When the news was confirmed, many people didn't panic. Instead, they felt a sense of relief. If they succeeded, their race would continue to multiply. Even if they didn't have 1,000 generations, they would at least be carefree for 100 years. If they failed, the world would be destroyed, and everyone would be finished. There were no rousing slogans, only a calm crowd that began to move towards the barracks and factories in an orderly manner. Even if they weren't on duty, everyone wanted to know what would happen next. In the final days of peace, the Alliance survived 35 years of the Door of Darkness. The 1st of April, year 36 of the Dark Portal. It was a rather amusing day for Duque. Duque suddenly sensed something. Almost at the same time, Nozdormu sent a telepathic message. Duque, can you feel it? Yes. My strength is still okay. No, it's better to let it out. It's impossible to guard against it for thousands of years. There will always be a time when you are weak or when the mortals show a flaw. Instead of pretending that it's scabies, it's better to bear the pain and get rid of it. Whether the wound becomes a fatal wound and dies, or whether the rotten flesh is cut off and completely healed, it all depends on our hard work and luck. After all, the intelligent races of the mortal world weren't created by the Titans. Strictly speaking, the Titans' creation was indeed very perfect. They could perform their duties for tens of thousands of years. They wouldn't feel bored, nor would they feel that anything was wrong. Because in their way of thinking, there was no such thing as freedom. Even their way of thinking was fixed. Mortals weren't the same. Freedom gave the intelligent races of the mortal world all kinds of imaginative ideas and magical creativity. At the same time, it stripped them of their stability. This was like the story of the boy who cried wolf. 1 or 2 stern warnings would wake them up. But as time passed, they would unknowingly become slack. To be able to make the entire alliance operate efficiently, with everyone working together and persisting in high-intensity labor and preparation for war for 10 years was already quite the limit. Frankly speaking, if the Burning Legion didn't come, the taut string in the hearts of the people would either break or they would secretly relax. Now, it was just right. In the past, Duque didn't know how the Burning Legion would come to Azeroth. According to the original history, Gul'dan in the parallel world of the King of Draenor was still alive and kicking. Then, he crossed time and space, rolled from the magically modified Draenor to Azeroth, and opened the ancient portal that had been sealed for a long time. That was the portal that was opened in the ancient war. Here came the problem. The ghoul Dan in the timeline of this world was long dead. His head was cut off and hollowed out. He was first given to Zol as a magic artifact, Ghoul Dan's skull. Not long after, Zol kicked Duque and sent him flying to Draenor, blowing up Draenor. What was amazing was that this thing blew up most of Draenor. Under the protection of Kill Jaden's power, this magic artifact was actually fine. Then, it fell into the hands of Illidan. Ghoul Dan's skull also fell into the hands of Duque after Illidan was defeated and captured. Duque threw it directly into the Light's Hope Chapel and let Alonsis fail and the others seal it for a long time. After unifying the 4 major elemental realms, Duque was worried that this thing would become a scourge, so he directly used the ultimate flame of the Land of Fire to destroy this skull. Now, the one who broke through the void and stepped out of the portal was shockingly Go Dan. Oh, Ghoul Dan. Having just stepped out of the chaos of time and space, Ghoul Dan's nerves were in a state of disorder. He was unable to immediately notice Nozdormu and Duque's spying. Duque asked Nozdormu, "Where did this guy come from?" Nozdormu's voice was like a whisper, "This ghoul Dan comes from a world in a parallel timeline that I don't know about. Hell, I feel the power of the fallen me in him." When Duque heard this, he almost bit off his own tongue. Right. Duque and Queen Sylvanas traveled through time and space and almost unified all the timelines where Azeroth had spread out. This almost did not include the timeline where Nozdormu fell and became the Eternal Dragon King. Obviously, the fallen Nozdormu in the future had tricked Azeroth. Chapter 1997. What should we do? Nozdormu asked Duque. The army will come eventually. Let Ghoul Dan do it. Are you sure you're not playing with fire? Nozdormu's tone was stern when he asked this question. Duque chuckled and gave Nozdormu an answer using a secret code. In Nozdormu's illusory projection, his elven face suddenly became very interesting. You have already calculated everything? Oh Titans, are you the king of space and time or am I? Nozdormu was indignant. Stop talking nonsense. Are you going to give it to me or not? Sigh. Up to you. The fate of Azeroth is in the hands of the mortal races. Nozdormu did not care anymore. 30 minutes later, the entire Alliance's defense system was ringing with warning sirens. Stormwind City, Stormwind Fortress. Although it looked like an old-fashioned fortress, it was no longer the same. The outer layer of the fortress was covered with a new type of alloy mixed with nether iron from Pandaria. The outer wall was a meter thick and could easily withstand the attacks of TNT cannons below 300 millimeters. Moreover, the fortress was just a cover, an entrance. The real command center had been placed 200 meters below the Stormwind Fortress. Abnormal spatial fluctuations. Report from the surveillance ship. Seismic waves detected. There's no mistake. The depth is less than 50 meters, almost on the surface. The location is in the middle of the endless ocean, confirmed to be the location of the Broken Isles. 10 minutes later. Report. We have a real-time image from the Broken Isles. The energy storm above the Broken Isles has weakened. Our surveillance ship has sent an optical image. Demons from the Burning Legion. Terror Guardians and Apocalypse Guards detected, 1,000. 2,000, and still increasing. Confirmed the Burning Legion's Abyssal Lord. 3, presumed to be an intermediate Void Lord. Terror Lords detected, unable to match with the known list, number 5, presumed to be 2 mid-tier and 3 low-tier Void Lords. Shadow element concentration on the Broken Isles rapidly increasing. Report, we have lost optical image. Surveillance ship Alpha confirmed safe for now. Half an hour ago, all the leaders and generals of the Alliance received a warning from Duque's invasion. They all knew that their commander was an almighty being. While they were surprised, they quickly got into the zone and waited for the final confirmation. In fact, many leaders had already entered battle positions. The frontline commanders, such as Varian and Kale, Bats, had already arrived at Naxxramas, which was hovering above the east of the Broken Islands, as well as the Dalajan in the west. The magic of the weave gave them the ability to float in the air for long periods of time. If not for the weave's carrying capacity, Duque wouldn't mind turning all the ships into flying battleships. In reality, it was more economical to use a warship on the sea. Sitting in the command post on Naxxramas, Duque looked at the fog-shrouded beach and couldn't help but think of the original history. On the broken beach, the Alliance and the Horde suffered the most tragic defeat in history. The master thief of MI7, Matthias Shaw, who had never failed, was tricked for the first time. He and his elite intelligence personnel were directly captured and controlled, and sent misleading information to Stormwind City, which directly led to the crushing defeat of the Alliance and the Horde coalition forces. Varian Rin and Wajin, the two leaders of the Alliance and the Horde, died in battle on the same day. It brought indelible losses to the Alliance and the Horde. In addition, the death of the Empress Dowager, Tyrion Fordring, made countless people of the Alliance shed tears. Since it was a certain transmigrator who had the final say here, there would naturally be no such thing. Duque's voice began to broadcast throughout the Alliance's military communication network. Where there was a magic mirror, countless soldiers formed circles and quietly looked at the commander who had an ageless face. Duque raised his head, his eyes full of determination. His gaze was so deep that it gave people a sense of confidence that he could see through the past and the future, and that he had the next 5,000 years in his hands. The Burning Legion is here. Just as the Alliance had been announcing. Everything that needed to be said had been said. Everything that needed to be prepared has been prepared. Before the war, the last thing I want to say is, since the beginning of the Dark Portal, the people of Azeroth have suffered enough. If the Alliance from 30 years ago had to face the main force of the Burning Legion, I would have all kinds of worries and fears. Because at that time, the Alliance was too young, and the long period of peace had numbed everyone's nerves. But now, we are definitely different. Look around you, what do you see? The most advanced weapons. The most complete preparation. The most extensive and powerful allies, 30 years. We have faced the unprecedented green tide of orcs, resisted the Lich King's undead army, killed the vanguard of the Burning Legion, and destroyed the ancient god and his servants. Believe me, and believe in yourselves. This is just another test of survival and destruction. I firmly believe that the people of the Alliance, and even the entire Azeroth, will cross this hurdle. There is only one reason. At this point, Duque suddenly paused. Then, it was as if all the air in their lungs was squeezed out, turning into a roar, turning into a thunderous roar that exploded in the ears of every Alliance soldier. Because, we have been through hundreds of battles. We are invincible. In an instant, the blood in the hearts of the millions of Alliance soldiers was ignited, turning into endless motivation that ran through every blood vessel in their bodies. It was so surging, so shocking. The passion that erupted like a volcano could not be suppressed at all. In the Eastern Kingdom, in Northrend, in Kalimdor, in Pandaria, outside the vortex of the endless ocean, every place with Alliance soldiers let out the same heaven-shaking roar. We have been through hundreds of battles. We are invincible. The raised fists represented the unyielding spirit of the many intelligent beings of Azeroth. Facing evil. We will never yield. Hearing the shouts from every corner of the magic net, feeling the roar that even the sturdy walls of the stronghold could not block, everyone in the command center was so excited that they could not control themselves. Duque waved his hand. Alliance soldiers. Attack! 8,000 of the latest flying battleships and 22,000 ships on the sea all sailed towards the Broken Islands. This shocking number, this attack speed, even Gul'dan, who had expected this world's alliance to fight to the death, was momentarily stunned. What kind of joke is this? Where did the alliance get so many soldiers? Chapter 1998. 30,000 warships was an unscientific number to begin with. Normally, only if Duque stuffed everyone in the alliance would they be able to operate such a number of warships. After all, with the technological level of the Alliance during World War II, a destroyer needed at least 200 people to operate, and 350 was the standard. A main battleship often needed around 2,000 people. But this was an unscientific fantasy world. Weren't there only a few Titans in the Pantheon? They could make Titan creations. Duque had cheated. For example, on the Alliance's Z-class destroyer, there were people running around everywhere. If one looked carefully, it wouldn't be hard to find that there were very few humans. On the ship, there were more mechanical gnomes with a metallic luster and iron dwarves. That's right, these guys were robots from Oder's Mimiron workshop. The mechanical gnomes with simple intelligence were competent for maintenance and other tasks. As long as the ship's blueprints were inputted into their brains and they had enough materials, they could complete damage control and other tasks. As for the iron dwarves with thick arms, they were the best workers. Carrying cannonballs was a cinch for them. As long as they had a commander, all the transportation work could be easily done. The only problem was that they had to recharge their batteries. After cutting off a large number of unnecessary manpower, what the intelligent races really needed to do was to fire the cannons, sonar, radar, and command. After a significant reduction, a 120-meter-long destroyer only needed 56 living people. Oh, not necessarily alive. It would be fine if they were the Forsaken. Even the largest battleship like the Bismarck only needed 300 people. This was completely unimaginable 5 years ago. Working with Oder, especially after Orgaren opened up the authority of the Protectors, creating a cannon fodder army of mechanical gnomes wasn't a problem at all. In the past few years, Mimiron's workshop had been operating at full speed, and this was the result. Should he learn about Odermorph? As for shipbuilding, should he learn about Titan Crafting's 3D printed parts? They directly mined high-grade ores in Nocent, refined the ores locally, and produced the flying battleships locally. The flying battleships built in Mimiron's workshop were far better than the steel battleships and bunkers built in the Eastern Kingdom. Later on, other than Iron Furnace Fort, all the other major port cities in the Alliance turned to building ships. On the other hand, the Alliance's main cities focused on the relatively simple flying frigates and destroyers. A smile appeared on Duque's face. It was hilarious to think about the history. The number of people from the Alliance and the Horde who could land on the broken beach was less than 2,000. Even if they were all elites like the Paladins of the Silver Hand, it would not be surprising for them to be wiped out under the attack of the Sea of Demons. But now, I'm sorry, but the Alliance definitely has the upper hand on the battlefield. The fleet here wasn't the entire Alliance, and of course, it wasn't the entire Burning Legion. It didn't matter how many billions of demons there were in the Burning Legion, as long as you could come over. A dozen Alliance single-propeller fighter jets were the first to arrive at the Broken Beach airspace. These were the P-51 Mustang fighter jets created by Duque. Duque had risen to power in the 15th year of the Dark Portal, and it had taken him 10 years to allow the Alliance to climb the technological tree from the wooden warships of the Olden Era to the era of steel warships. Many of the technologies were missing or temporarily stuck. It took another 10 years for the uneven development of the military technology tree to reach the level of Earth's World War II. It wasn't that the Alliance didn't have faster fighter jets, but they weren't real fighter jets. They were modified from the magic net, and they consumed a lot of wind elements. Even if Duque controlled the 4 elements of Azeroth, he couldn't use a large amount of the elements on the fighter jets. The speed of the P-51 Mustang was definitely enough, and the main point was to break through defenses. The rumbling in the sky attracted Ghoul Dan's attention. He raised his head and looked in the direction of the sound with his crooked eyes. There were 2 fighter jets in a group, and a total of 8 fighter jets were arranged in a herringbone formation. This formation couldn't be a coincidence. Also, this speed, it's so fast. Even though Ghoul Dan was a powerful lackey of the Burning Legion, his position was at most that of a low-level Void Lord. If it wasn't for the power that Kill Jaden had given him, the demons around him wouldn't even care about him. TSK. Ghoul Dan leaned on the skeletal staff that was like a walking stick and took a deep breath. He had already realized that the Alliance had definitely come prepared. The idea of setting up a trap on the broken beach to trap the Alliance and the Horde was destroyed before it even started. Take them down. Ghoul Dan raised his skeletal staff, and instantly, dozens of Eridar warlocks took over. As the elites of the Eridar tribe, the standards of the Eridar Magi were already quite shocking. Furthermore, on the Broken Islands, the shadow energy that was emitted from the tomb of Sargeras made them even more powerful. The Mustang was indeed very powerful, but it depended on who the opponent was. If it was an opponent with similar technology, like a propeller-type fighter jet, it could easily defeat most of the Earth's World War II fighter jets. But if it was something from the mystical side, they wouldn't be able to go against it. Even if the elemental radar on the aircraft suddenly sounded an alarm, most of the pilots' reactions were a beat slower. The shadow elements suddenly gathered in the sky, forming a sticky space. When the fighter jet crashed into it, it was like falling into the sea. The sudden change in density caused more than 10 Mustang jets to be smashed to pieces on the spot. Only the ace pilot flying at the back pulled the lever to the limit, causing the high-speed fighter jet to fly in the largest arc, narrowly avoiding the death trap. That was enough. They were here to scout. Pegasus 05 has discovered the enemy, it's the Burning Legion. The coastline is different from the original map, now corrected to X. Nothing was more important than first-hand information on the coastline. When the second battle of the Dark Portal had ended, Ghoul Dan had come to the tomb of Sargeras on the Broken Islands. The Broken Islands had actually existed in the center of the Endless Sea for the past 10,000 years, but it was surrounded by a huge whirlpool. The people inside couldn't leave, and the people outside couldn't enter. Even though the Alliance had developed flying ships, they still couldn't change this situation. The terrifying elemental undulations from the huge whirlpool formed a hurricane, which could easily destroy flying ships and ships on the sea. Ghoul Dan had come here more than 30 years ago, and he had also lost an entire fleet. But after he arrived, he used his evil power to raise part of the land that had sunk to the bottom of the sea. This was the broken beaches of today. The Alliance seriously lacked the geographical data of the broken beaches. Without this, they couldn't determine the shooting data, and there was no way to talk about long-range bombing. The Alliance sacrificed their reconnaissance planes to obtain the most precious first-hand information. Chapter 1999. Reporting, we've received the latest data. Calibrate, then test the main cannon of the 7th Fleet, Marshal Taylor ordered. 30 seconds later, the 7th Fleet in the east of the broken beach began to fire. The three 460mm cannons roared, and after a minute, the huge metal shells crossed the distance of 30,000 meters and began to fall on the broken beach. Seeing the high-speed shells in the distance, Ghoul Dan instinctively felt that something was wrong. This Ghoul Dan was not the Ghoul Dan who had only experienced the first and second battles of the Dark Portal. He was the King of Draenor, who had experienced a branched timeline. Because he was born in a branched timeline, his strength could not compare to the original Ghoul Dan at this point in time. Just because he was not strong enough did not mean that he was not knowledgeable enough. After seeing the advanced technology that the goblins had passed on to the beastmen, Ghoul Dan immediately jumped up. Stop them. Stop those things. If the shells were so easy to stop, they wouldn't be shells. With an initial speed of 780 meters per second, coupled with the extreme speed and destructive power produced by the acceleration of gravity, how could it be so easy to stop them? Even though hundreds of Apocalypse guards hurriedly flew into the air, only a few succeeded. Huge metal shadows swept past the demons' retinas and crashed into the ground beside them. The smaller and more agile demons could still dodge subconsciously. The huge lords of the abyss had no place to dodge. They were practically born as meat shields. Boom, boom, boom. A series of loud noises rang out. If it was a mortal's eardrums, they would definitely be pierced. The continuous explosions spread along the entire coastline and into the depths of the broken beach. Countless sand and large rocks were lifted from the beach, mixed with seawater and torn flesh. Some apocalypse guards fluttered their wings in panic and retreated at a speed of tens of meters per second, but they were still caught up by the explosions and swallowed up. A certain Lord of the Abyss was hit by a large caliber shell. Its fat dragon-shaped lower body swelled up like a balloon and then exploded. Flesh and blood flew everywhere. With this as the background, more and more demons were blown into the sky. Enemy attack. Mainly physical attacks. There's also a considerable amount of fire elemental attacks. Ghoul Dan was a demigod warlock. Even if he was reduced to a dog, his life-saving abilities were still considered strong among demigods. He immediately sacrificed a void demon to form a powerful shadow shield to block the shockwaves of the explosion. He also used the Hellhound's super magic resistance to resist the damage of the fire elements. The other demons were not as arrogant as him. Most demons did not like to use shields. Their tyrannical physiques and natural elemental resistance were the best shields. Now, they were paying with their lives for neglecting to defend. Bastard. Wizards. Where are the wizards? Our covert operation has failed. We need to set up the magic formation and shield immediately. We can't let the enemy's shells hit our vanguard unscrupulously. Ghoul Dan roared in anger, all demons, adjust your resistances if you can. Whether it was a magic array or a large-scale war spell, the most important thing was time. Unfortunately, the Alliance wouldn't give him time to react. This time, a strange phenomenon appeared in the western sky. Countless golden arrows of light fell from the sky like fireworks, turning into a golden rain that rained down. The leaders of the Throne Conference maintained a constant connection. Of course, Duque was also connected to a special magic communication network for his harem. In this network, Elusia exclaimed, "So beautiful." Kalia, who knew next to nothing about war, became a rare expert. Right. These new shells are called missiles. Yes, they're the East Wind Type 3 Holy Light missiles. Huh. How did you remember? Hey, I once asked Duque why the Alliance's new missiles were called the East Wind series, Kalia said with admiration. Duque suddenly recited a poem to me. The east wind night blooms on 1,000 trees, and when it blows, stars fall like rain. Wow. So poetic. It wasn't just Elusia. A few girls exclaimed as well. It's so beautiful. I didn't think that Duque could use a poem to describe the scene of a missile tearing through the sky and entering the battlefield, Tyron praised sincerely. Duque looked like he was constipated. God damn it, when Kalia asked him, he just happened to be in his sage time. A man in his sage time could easily think about life. Who knew what had gotten into him to suddenly think of this? Alright, he even became famous. Now that his sister praised him, Duque thought about it and apologized in his heart. He decided to secretly press down the coffin of a certain Chinese poet with the surname Xian. Whoosh whoosh whoosh, the holy lights suddenly shot out, and the shadow fog that had just risen into the air was cancelled out by the holy light of the opposite attribute. The demons, who had barely managed to survive the torrential rain of cannonballs, had their bodies completely pierced through. They fell heavily and rolled awkwardly on the muddy beach floor, howling in pain. Blue-black demon blood flowed to the ground and mixed with the seawater, turning into a thick, stinky liquid. No. This can't go on. Where are those bastards' fleets? Ghoul Dan shouted. They're almost there. One of the demons acting as his assistant had an undisguised look of disdain. The void battlefield outside Azeroth's atmosphere had been the battlefield of the Penishade dragons for the past 25,000 years. They abided by the mission given to them by the Titans, and never retreated even in death. However, as the power of the 5 dragon aspects of the Sleeping Dragon Temple weakened, and the Penishade dragons suffered heavy losses in many battles, the protection circle of planet Azeroth was different from the one in history. It could be said that it was still there, but in reality, its effectiveness had been greatly reduced. It wasn't even 30% of its peak. Now, on planet Azeroth's orbit, there was something unusual. Since ancient times, there had only been 2 moons in Azeroth. Now, there were 4. The other 2 were not natural celestial bodies, and of course, they were not the Titan's creations. It was Elun who had spent a lot of effort and used her divine power to catch 2 comets that passed by Azeroth, and without affecting the rotation of Azeroth, she brought them into the planet's gravitational circle. At this moment, all the mages who were monitoring the space outside Azeroth's atmosphere through the magic network were alarmed at the same time. In the huge celestial body that was jokingly called the Third Moon by the Alliance, there was a very modern command post. It became noisy inside. Alert! Alert! The Burning Legion's Void Fleet has been discovered. The number is 2,000, 3,000, and still increasing. They are all star destroyers. Strangely, all the staff inside were fire demons. Chapter 2000. Monitoring templates were made with fire demons that were 4 or 5 meters tall, with elemental conduction as the transmission method, and arcane magic mirrors. Every fire demon was busy in front of their control panel. Majordomo Executus, the commander of the fortress, even had to face more than 100 mirror screens to deal with different situations. Even Duque, who had seen this scene with his own eyes, wondered if he had entered the wrong set and gone to Star Wars. In fact, this was not the same thing. Azeroth needed protection. At this point in history, the dragon's sleeping temple had collapsed, and of the original 5 dragon aspects, only Alexstrasza and Isra were left. The planet's protection array had failed. The Burning Legion's planet destroyers could land wherever they wanted. Duque once complained that the Burning Legion spaceship, which couldn't blow up a planet with one shot, had the nerve to be called a planet destroyer. Later, Duque understood. Not everyone who stuck their penis in the ground would be the same as Ux the entire planet. Humans couldn't. Planet destroyers could. Think about it. How did the Burning Legion use this triangular cone-shaped planet destroyer in history? The bow of the ship fell down and plunged into the ground, and then the portal on the ship opened, through which thousands of demon soldiers were released. Wasn't this like rape? They just stuck it in and shot out a bunch of crap, polluting the enemy. Thinking of this, Duque felt that the planet destroyer was worthy of its name. In history, the Burning Legion used this trick to turn Azeroth upside down. Think about it, in Azeroth, where there were no large-scale flying ships and few mages, they just dropped a planet destroyer in a random no-man's land. If left alone, tens of thousands of demons would appear one day later. They might not be able to deal with it even if they sent 100,000 troops. If left alone, Azeroth would be destroyed. This was even more disgusting than the Scourge. The Burning Legion could parachute wherever they wanted, and the Alliance and the Horde, who lacked mobility, could only watch. Duque really didn't know how the Alliance and the Horde survived the original spacetime. Since Duque was here, of course, it had to be changed. The so-called Third Moon was a relatively round comet. The widest part was 10 kilometers, and the narrowest part was 8.2 kilometers. The Third Moon looked like a huge fireball. A huge amount of fire elements covered the entire celestial body. In the universe, unless it was a star that emitted light and heat on its own, the terrifying vacuum would absorb all energy and annihilate all flames. When Duque first proposed this idea, almost all of his allies objected, thinking that Duque was being too whimsical. Duque had engraved a giant Titan runic magic array inside the comet, giving it gravity. At the same time, he connected the Azeroth weave to the comet, allowing the fire elemental energy in the Land of Flames to enter the comet through the spatial tunnel. When Elun used her divine power to fix the comet in the orbit of planet Azeroth, and used the power of the moon goddess to restrain the leakage of fire elements, a space fortress was born. Dumok named it the City of Condors in a very bad taste. The only problem was that it was impossible for mortals to operate such a huge elemental fortress. Just the vacuum of outer space was enough to kill all mortals. Originally, Duke wanted the Draenei to contribute an airship as the core, but the Draenei, who were lacking in space technology, said they could not do it. In the end, Duque waved his hand and let the fire demons do the work. Anyway, elemental creatures wouldn't die as long as the elements in their bodies weren't exhausted. Hence, this scene happened. Target, Burning Legion's planet destroyer fleet. Execute as ordered. Target locked. Very good. Wrath of the Fire God, launch. The proud fire demon leader waved his arm heavily. In terms of fighting and hacking, he was absolutely third-rate. Ever since he followed Duque, his status hadn't been low. Now, this position was more suitable for him to use his strengths. Every fire demon cannoneer could clearly see the dazzling crimson beam of light shooting towards the planet destroyer battleships. This was really a terrifying scene. It violently impacted the minds of everyone in the Alliance headquarters in the Eastern Kingdom who was watching this scene. At this moment, the Burning Legion fleet was dumbfounded. The demons had been fighting with the five-color dragon guardian of Azeroth for almost 25,000 years. They had lost countless times under the planetary defense arrays, but they had never been attacked from a distance of 1,000 kilometers. Of course, they were curious about why there were 2 more moons in Azeroth, but they didn't expect this to happen. After years of fighting, they had long known the strength of the five-color dragon guardian. If they didn't enter the void battlefield area, at least 100 kilometers away from the five-color dragon guardian's void fortress, there wouldn't be any dragons attacking them. This scene subverted all their knowledge and imagination. In the front of the Legion fleet, more than 100 planet destroyers that were directly hit by the main cannon of the city of Condors disappeared in an instant. The excessive high temperature and high concentration of fire elemental energy made it so that they didn't even have time to explode. After the organic and inorganic matter evaporated together, only complete nothingness was left. As for whether the demons on the ships would have a chance to resurrect, only God knew. The explosion occurred in the rear, in the second row of the Legion fleet. Some of the explosions occurred in the left and right rows that were not directly hit. The ships further out were also affected by the irresistible energy shockwaves and shook out of order. What an idiotic rookie captain. He drove the starship to the edge of the sun and was affected by the solar wind. In the communications circuit of the first ship that hit Yusheng, it was filled with wails and screams. The warlocks of Eridar were all cursing. What's going on? How can the natives of Azeroth have such advanced space weapons? Have they analyzed the technology of the Pantheon? Impossible. We spent 10,000 years and barely analyzed 80% of the functions of the planet destroyer. We can't even stabilize the main cannon. How can those ignorant natives have this kind of ability? What should we do? Continue? Idiot. Do you want to pay for all of Master Sardra's planet destroyers? This was the weakness of the Burning Legion. That's right, as long as the demon's soul was not destroyed, his soul could theoretically return to the distorted nether and resurrect infinitely. They were the most powerful cannon fodder in the world. No race could stop them in an infinite number of battles. But the planet destroyers were not infinite. The technology of the Pantheon's planet destroyers was many times higher than that of the Eridar wizards. It was a level of technology that could not be kept up with. They could not even look up to it. The army had spent 25,000 years and had not been able to replicate even a prototype ship, let alone mass-produce it. You're tuning in to the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.